Well, what have you got for us?
Well, it's kicking off, isn't it?
It is.
In Iran, Israel.
Yeah.
The retaliation has
Oh, sorry,
begun.
we can't hear you, apparently. So I should have...
You didn't need the extra minute.
I didn't need it. But there we are. Well, can we go now then? Should we just go? Yeah. All right. Listen, it's been a pleasure. Don't forget tonight, Plank of the Week. Coming up, the lovely Alex Phillips for the next 3 hours. She'll be talking you through the latest disasters that are going on. It's Friday the 13th. Of course it is. We'll see you on Monday.
I can announce this government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so that we reach that level in 2027.
The answer from European capitals has been as resounding as it is clear. We are in an era of rearmament to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
On Saturday, we also agreed a new £2.2 billion loan for Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. It is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to you?
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know. I need to know.
He is a great gentleman. A great, great gentleman. He said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right. Well, I just think he should be more appreciative, because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us, because, as you know, that's right there, that's the border.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you are not
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, good morning. Welcome to the show. This is Alex Phillips here with you until 1 o'clock today. Oh, glad to hear it's going to be one of the hottest days of the year. Thank goodness for that. I thought we'd sacrifice spring all of a sudden, but apparently we're going to be sliding into summer. What is summer going to hold? Well, certainly temperatures are getting hot in the Middle East. Israel has launched a massive wave of attacks against Iran, targeting the regime's nuclear facilities. Over 200 Israeli Air Force jets were part of strikes which took place in the early hours of this morning, dropping 330 munitions on very specific targets. Israel has also assassinated the head of Iran's armed forces, General Mohammad Bagheri, who's the chief of the military staff. He was killed alongside top commanders, as well as 6 nuclear scientists. Iran now has launched their retaliation with more than 100 drones on their way over to Israel. And America said nothing to do with us. Don't target American troops, putting various embassy staff on lockdowns or giving them evacuation orders in fears that the Iranian regime may also round on America. And we've learned as well that Britain is not going to be protecting Israel in the retaliations from Iran. That's according to government sources. Wow, how ominous is this? Was it the right thing to do? What happens next? Let's speak now to defence expert and research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society, Andrew Fox. Andrew, good to have you on the programme. Do you know, it's funny, just yesterday daytime, I was speaking to a good friend of mine who writes a lot of comment pieces on geopolitics, and he said to me, do you know what, if I was Israel, I would go in hard against Iran now. Their proxies have been massively weakened. They're really under-resourced when it comes to arms and munition. And also, we don't know how far away they are from building nuclear weapons. Now's probably the moment to strike. Do you think that that opinion is correct?
It's certainly the one I hold. So your friend has basically done all my work for me there, because I agree completely. And what we saw last night, I think, was an operation that had been years in the planning. The previous attacks we've seen between Israel and Iran directly have essentially been a very stage-managed tit-for-tat. So Israel bombs Iran fires a load of missiles back, and then everyone kind of agrees that that's enough. I think this is a very different step change. We've seen 5 waves of Israeli airstrikes. The military and political rhetoric out of Israel suggests that more may be coming over the coming days. And I think this is really a watershed moment in the Middle East.
It was suggested that Donald Trump, he quite explicitly stated he didn't want to see a bombing campaign in the Middle East. He wants to sort of smooth things over, patch things up, was even considering getting Iran back round the table for discussing the nuclear deal, which, as far as I can tell, Tehran has never followed or maintained their end. Do you think, though, that Israel probably did notify America before conducting this massive operation?
Yes, almost certainly. I mean, since 7th of October and every front that's taken place in this conflict, be it Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, wherever, CENTCOM and the Israelis have been in pretty close lockstep. That it would be highly unusual for this to have taken place without the Americans knowing about it.
How comprehensive does Israel now need to be? How comprehensive do you think they've been so far in terms of targeting these nuclear facilities? Because a lot of people are worried that actually, rather than deter Iran from pushing ahead with making a nuclear weapon, that this could actually put things on accelerants.
Well, Fordow is the location that's the biggest worry right now. That is one of the centrifuge sites. Natanz is the other. That was struck last night, and we're waiting to see what the damage was. But Fordow is about half a mile underneath a mountain. It's incredibly hard to strike, and it might be a future target for the Israelis. But what that does mean in the meantime is that Iran does retain some nuclear capability, and whether they make a rush for a bomb or not, very much, I think, depends on the deterrence factor. We know there are American heavy bombers based in Qatar and in Diego Garcia. And they are certainly a preventative measure, I suspect, to stop Iran escalating on the nuclear side of things. I think in terms of their general response, we've seen the 100 drones gone up. They've mostly been shot down already. Then ballistic missile capability was directly targeted by the Israelis last night, so that is highly limited. So what I think we can expect to see is a more asymmetric response from Iran this time, where they will use their very, very comprehensive cyber capabilities to try and attack infrastructure, Israeli for sure, and potentially Israeli allies wider in the Gulf. And there are 2 proxies remaining that Iran have in their back pocket. Most of them have been destroyed, but they've still got the militias in Iraq and the Houthis down in Yemen. So they have an ability to try and do something with those proxies. But compared to where they were before 7th of October, they are massively weakened and limited in what they can do in response to this attack.
Is Israel therefore going to be perfectly capable of defending itself against a retaliatory strike by Iran with the Iron Dome, with interceptions of their own bombers? Or do you think they're going to have to rely on the international community, as we have seen happen before? You know, astonishingly, many of Israel's neighbours, who may not necessarily be in lockstep with Iran regionally, provided at least their airspace and on occasion airports and on occasion military jets to intercept missiles headed towards Israel. What we've learned is Britain doesn't want to be part of any sort of protection, as they were last time round with France. We don't know about America. One assumes America would step in to help Israel. But can Israel stand on its own 2 feet, given Iran's weakened position?
Well, the Jordanians have reported shooting down some of those 100 drones. And we know from previous attacks, the Iranians have really struggled to get through. They've not landed a real target on anyone. I think the last attack, the only person that was actually killed was a Palestinian in Gaza with a rocket that dropped short. So the Iron Dome, Arrow, David Sling, those missile defense systems that Israel has are incredibly effective. The Israeli Air Force will, of course, be on absolute standby for this. It's not unexpected. And I would be very surprised if the Americans didn't lend a hand should it be required. You know, that tight relationship between America and Israel is long established. It seems to be unshakable in spite of everything that's going on over the last 20 months. So yes, I would expect to see as a minimum American jets. And I think it's utterly shameful that we have decided to abandon Israel at this point. Both Keir Starmer and David Lammy's responses, certainly on X, were about as milquetoast and lily-livered and wet lettuce as you could possibly hope to see. And it's a real shame that our current government have decided to take us in this direction.
I mean, Israel once again saying it's on the front line of defending the whole Western world from tyranny and terrorism, and said, according to their intelligence, Iran could have built 15 nuclear bombs within days, given justification for why they felt they had to go in and stop things right now. How's the international community responding to this? I mean, Israel already is a bit of a pariah when it comes to the UN. Are there countries in the world, do you think, that's going to take Israel's side, or are they going to see a whole lot of opposition to this move?
What we're seeing is a lot of positioning. So, for example, Saudi Arabia have condemned the attacks because they have to publicly. They're very conscious that Iran has attacked them in the past. And they're very conscious that the sort of the word on the street in Saudi Arabia is very anti-Israel in sentiment, and that's an important demographic for them to keep, placated. But in private, certainly the Saudis and the UAE and Bahrain will be delighted that this nuclear capability has been so significantly damaged. And when we look at Europe, I think we can expect to see a very similar line to that taken to Keir Starmer, where they call for a lack of escalation, where they call for peace in the Middle East and then do nothing really substantive. I think everyone in the world knows that Iran is a malign influence. Even in the last couple of weeks, we've seen Iranian agents intercepted by our own security services. You know, we are under attack from Iran. It's not military, but it's certainly subterfuge, and it's certainly an asymmetric threat. So Israel has indeed done the world a huge favour here, and it's something that we should be absolutely supporting.
Where do we go from here, though? I mean, one assumes Iran may be weakened at the moment, but it's not going to suddenly roll over and take it lying down and say, OK, fair enough, you win, there you go, Israel. We're not going to develop any sort of nuclear arms. They're going to want to at least be seen to push back. How do you think things might play out over the coming days, especially if Israel continues their operation?
Well, it comes down to capability. And at the moment, certainly in a command sense, Iran is going to be absolutely at sea because they've lost so many senior commanders. And we know both the president and the supreme leader would have been targeted had that target come online. So those attacks weren't successful. So there is a rump of leadership there. But for example, all of their Air Force leadership were taken out last night. They were all in one bunker hiding from the strikes and got wiped out in one missile. So pulling together a strategy is going to be challenging for the Iranians in the immediate short term because they've got no one to make the strategy or enact the strategy. So once they've recovered from that, we can see them using their missiles, but Israel now has fully the upper hand. You know, in boxing terms, Iran are on the canvas and the Israelis are stood over them waiting to hit them again if they try and get up. So it's very much in their best interests to try and de-escalate. But you have to remember that honour is a critical part of Iranian foreign policy. They take that sort of national pride exceptionally importantly. And that's why they didn't agree to the deal that Mr. Trump was trying to get them to agree to, because they would have seen it as a blow to their national reputation. So how they balance this with the fact that their capability is so degraded, it is going to be a really interesting one to watch.
Yeah, I mean, there are people reporting on this, talking that Israel has taken a big gamble in all of this, that actually Iran might now accelerate to creating a nuclear bomb in a site that is yet to be struck, and that could pose the most significant risk to that part of the world, if not the whole world, that we've seen in a very, very long time. Do you think that it has been a gamble? Do you think there is a risk now that Iran might have something up their sleeve?
I mean, there's always a risk, but the bigger question is, what do you do to mitigate that risk? And there will be contingency plans for this to happen beyond doubt, because Israel will know that striking that site, particularly in Fordau, will be very difficult because it's under a mountain. And also the Iranian test facilities are way down in the south of the country, and nothing I've seen suggested that those were struck last night. So there is a risk here, but as I said, America has pre-positioned their heavy bombers, and there is always an option for Israel to escalate with American assistance if needed, should Iran take those most dangerous steps in trying to acquire a nuclear weapon in the immediate short term.
Has Iran got anyone who might back it up, given it itself as sort of militarily weakened? Are there other nations out there? We know they've got a close relationship, albeit maybe one of convenience, with Russia when it comes to sharing arms and perhaps expertise and going on military exercises together. We know that in the anti-Western axis with countries such as China. But would any of those nations actually step up and come to Iran's aid?
Well, China are clearly a key ally, and you have to look towards Pakistan as well. Obviously, the Taliban in Afghanistan are very fond of them. These are not major players, and ultimately, for all the kind of discussion around American use of force since President Trump came in, it doesn't change the fact that America is the world's only military superpower, and should it come to a toe-to-toe scrap, there's nobody that could stand against the might of the US armed forces. So that is a very powerful deterrent, and I suspect at this point Iran's allies will be looking at them and thinking perhaps it's time that discretion is better than valor at this point.
Andrew, thank you ever so much for your analysis. We are going to keep you up to date as that retaliation from Iran has taken place, with drones being launched in the direction of Israel. Many have already been intercepted. That is following Israel during the early hours of this morning, dropping a significant number of bombs, 330 in fact, more than that, on various particular targets in Iran, including the regime's nuclear facilities. Over 200 Israeli Air Force jets last night took part in those strikes. They've also taken out the head of the armed forces, General Mohammad Bagheri. Iran has, like I said, launched more than 100 drones towards Israel. I think this is going to continue playing out during the course of today and over the next few days. What uncertain times we live in. OK, we're going to take a short break now, and from something that seemed pretty doom-laden to perhaps a very rare miracle. One survivor aboard that horrific plane crash yesterday as the Air India flight due to land in Gatwick Airport crash landed just after takeoff, and yet there was one lone survivor, a British man in seat 11A. We're going to be discussing that after this.
This runway that the plane took off from may be rather too short. Is that a possible explanation for what went wrong here?
Indeed. I tracked the ground radar information, which has not yet been confirmed by the Indian authorities, and clearly shows the aircraft entering the runway at an intersection and initiating its takeoff roll right from there instead of backtracking.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Now, you must have seen those breathtaking pictures of that horrific plane crash yesterday in India. The Air India flight bound for London Gatwick from Ahmedabad in Western India that crash-landed just after takeoff, having only gained about 400 feet of altitude. The black box has now been recovered from the crash site. That's according to police sources. The black box, one hopes, would hold key information about what actually happened, as people are really scratching their heads to try and figure out if this was mechanical failure, if this was a freak accident, if this was pilot error. Let's catch up now with Nick Ellaby, who's at Gatwick. Nick, I mean, relief, I think, that they've now managed to find a black box and can start looking into what actually happened behind this incident. But plenty of British families today waking up knowing that they have lost loved ones. I believe 52 Britons were on board that fated plane.
Yeah, good morning, Alex. 53 Britons, we're told by Air India, and also Gatwick Airport confirmed that figure, out of 242 people on board, including something like 12 crew, 169 Indian nationals, 7 Portuguese nationals as well that we understand lived potentially in London and Manchester, so strong connections to the UK, and 1 Canadian national as well. You mentioned that black box. We know at least 1 black box has been recovered. There should have been 2 on the plane as the investigations continue. And incredibly, we also will have that 1 personal testimony from 40-year-old Vishwas Kumar Ramesh, that the man, company director from Leicester, who walked away from the plane crash. We understand the only survivor. Really an incredible miracle story. He's told the Hindustan Times that when the flight took off, within 5 to 10 seconds, it felt like it was stuck in the air, he said. And then he described lights flickering green and white, and said the plane rammed into some establishment that was there. We now know that that was a doctor's hostel on the ground there. We have been informed by authorities in India that at least 8 people on the ground lost their lives, as well as 241 out of the 242 people aboard that plane. And Ramesh also said, well, he was sat in seat 11A. He said he saw the exit. He thought he could try and get out. He managed to. And he said he doesn't know how he survived. He said he saw people dying in front of his eyes, but he was able to just walk out of the rubble. An unbelievable story, which is really rare, because in these crashes you either get a number of people surviving or no one at all. To have 1 out of 242 is quite astounding.
But tragically, we do know that he has lost his brother, who was sitting on the same row, but completely the opposite side. So devastating mixed news for that family. My understanding is Air India have now ground various Boeing Dreamliner jets until they find out what might be behind this tragedy.
Yeah, I'd seen that there were reports that Air India were considering grounding that fleet of 787 Dreamliners. That aircraft has been operational since 2011. This is the first time one of those Dreamliners has come down. So you could say that, I mean, up until now, it had an impeccable safety record. We understand some 1 billion passengers it's taken in the last 14 years across our 5 million flights. So air travel still one of, if not the safest way to travel. In terms of what Air India are doing, I mean, here at Gatwick we have a crisis centre set up for families of the victims. Thoughts and prayers are with them. Those sentiments have been echoed by Air India and Gatwick, and also our politicians here in the UK, and Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, who's been visiting the scene of the crash today and also visited Vishwas Kumar Ramesh in hospital as well. He didn't speak to the press though. We understand Tata Sons, the company that own Air India, are offering £86,000, which is 10 million rupees, in compensation to the families of each passenger who lost their lives. There is a reception centre here at Gatwick, as I say. The UK Foreign Office are working with crisis teams both here in London and in India to support those families. Yeah, I mean, a tragic story, and obviously with these air disasters, it's something we can all relate to. We all take flights. I mean, I'm here at Gatwick today, and it's pretty much business as usual. There are a number of flights that are cancelled, but I think that's more to do with what's going on in the Middle East than to what happened in Ahmedabad. That flight came down outside the airport compound, and indeed Ahmedabad airport was reopened just a few hours following the crash yesterday.
And have you heard any more from anyone you've spoken to about theories of what could have happened? Because from everything I've read, there isn't particularly any sort of conclusive evidence pointing one way or another.
No, and until we get those investigation reports from the black boxes into exactly what happened, we won't really know the full details. You know, we can, we've had air travel experts, aviation experts, saying that, you know, we know the landing gear was down, and it's been commented that the flaps, the wing flaps may have been in the wrong position. And as I say, we now have that one testimony from Vishwas Kumar Ramesh, who heard and saw what happened on the plane. He reported a very loud noise some 30 seconds after the plane took off. So as well as those black boxes, the investigation will have Vishwas's testimony when he's better and well enough to talk. We understand he's got impact injuries on his face, his eyes and his chest, but unbelievable that footage of him just walking away from the crash. And we had also an interview with his brother on Sky News yesterday, where he said that he got the call on the runway to say he was just taking off, and then 2 minutes later a video call to say, I don't know how I'm still alive. But 241 people on board that flight we know lost their lives. Thoughts and prayers are with them, and at least 8 people on the ground, but we expect that number could well rise in the coming hours and days.
Thank you ever so much, Nick. That's Nick Ellaby, talk reporter, live there from Gatwick Airport, giving us the latest on that horrific air crash incident that happened yesterday. A plane leaving Ahmedabad in western India, crashing just after takeoff, having only reached 400 feet in altitude. The wing ailerons apparently were not deployed. There's been a lot of speculation at what could have happened, with many experts ruling out things such as a bird strike, because that would normally only take out one engine, still enabling a plane to be temporarily airworthy. We're going to have to wait for more information. It could be a long time, of course, until we find out theories on whether this was a technical failure, a freak incident, or indeed pilot error. But a black box has now been recovered from the wreckage, enabling experts to begin to look into all of those things. OK, we're going to be taking a short break now, but when I come back, we're going to be discussing why it is that the French have received almost €1 billion from the UK government to stop boats from crossing the Channel, and yet the rate at which they're seizing boats and preventing people getting on these dinghies has dropped. What is going on? We're going to be catching up with Jack Elson, political editor of The Sun, after this.
across the UK. On DAB+. On your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, you'd have needed to be living under a rock for the past however many years to not question whether or not we have a serious issue with Britain's broken borders. And in the latest farcical chapter of how not to do things to prevent the illegal flow of migrants trying their luck to break into our country is the news that French cops are apparently getting worse at preventing small boats from crossing the channel, making a mockery of the latest £480 million quid we have sent across the channel to aid them in their duties. Let's speak now to Jack Elson, political editor of The Sun. Good morning to you, Jack. I mean,
good morning, Alex.
You have to question this. Good money after bad. Normally, if you are paying somebody to do something, you will have an expectation of returns. You will expect them to be able to prove that the money is being spent wisely. And yet, when it comes to the French, there have been a number of tranches of millions of pounds sent across the channel to help their police prevent small boats from departing from the French coastline, and time and again we see footage of French police almost waving them off.
Yeah, and pictures speak 1,000 words. And despite the fact that every time we ask Downing Street whether they really believe that we are getting value for money from this £480 million deal, they say yes. But anyone with a set of eyes can see that actually it's not working, because one, we see 15,000 already small boat crossings this year alone, a record amount in terms of the actual time period. And also we see French police often doing nothing. And I think one of the travesties with this is that it seems the French don't really care about it. It doesn't really seem a priority for them, despite the hundreds of millions being given to them by British taxpayers. And you can see that in their tactics. I mean, one of the things which is the most infuriating is the fact that they operate a pool system. So actually, what will happen is that they'll send over 300 cops or so from somewhere like Lille or somewhere like Paris. They'll spend a couple of weeks on the French beaches. It's a bit like sort of, civic duty or something. They'll go down there. They've got no training whatsoever in how to deal with them. And so they're not specialists. Now, the French are now promising, finally, to create an actual sort of dedicated squad to be doing this. But why haven't they done it before? This crisis has been going on for a long time now. For 3 years now, we've been sending money across the channel, hundreds of millions of pounds of British taxpayers' money, and people are getting sick of it. And I think they need to step up. And Yvette Cooper is saying that she's extracted all these promises from the French Interior Minister in terms of turning around boats in the channel, getting more dedicated officers on the beaches. But at the moment, it doesn't seem to be bearing fruit at all. I mean, I used to think maybe politically the French had reason to not want to stop these people traversing into the United Kingdom. And yet, the more I think about it, the more I think it works in France's favour, because the reason they have so many migrants traipsing over the border of France is to then go and accumulate in Calais in order to get to Britain. So actually, you would imagine that if the French were able to pull their fingers out and start stopping the flows of boats across the channel to the United Kingdom, it would have a beneficial impact on them. Totally, and I think that's the argument which Britain's been making to them. It's the argument we've been making for a long time, which is that, like you said, it might seem in their interest just to let people, leave Calais and go across the channel. They shouldn't give a fig. But actually, you're right, because Britain is such a pull factor, we are an island nation, so they have to come through somewhere. And that somewhere is often northern France. And so you're right, actually, it would be beneficial to them, you would think, because they wouldn't be then on that migration route. But there's so many problems here. The French, I think, are just one element of this, really. Another big element, in which this is the point the French have been making to Britain, which is that we are just such a pull factor nation. We sort of roll out the red carpet to a lot of migrants in terms of getting hotels, in terms of getting food, in terms of getting some sort of handouts. And therefore, it's really sort of, it takes two to tango here. The French need to be doing a lot more in terms of their, in terms of stepping up on the beaches. But also we need to be doing much more in terms of making Britain a lot less attractive so that people don't want to come here in the first place. And what do these migrants who have been refused asylum in various other European countries get in France? One assumes that they're not being put in hotels over in Calais. Well, and they're clearly not, because a few years ago we obviously saw that big jungle in Calais that was then dispersed. But you still see clips the whole time of people living in awful conditions in northern France, conditions that nobody should be living in, and that's why they want to get to Britain, because they know that they can get hotels, handouts, and the rest of it. But you're right in terms of at the moment, and the French mayor recently in Calais described Britain as El Dorado. Now, if you're being told that you can leave France, pay a few £1,000s, and come over to the UK and have all sort of belt and braces and all the trimmings and the rest of it, then you will probably do that. But I think that what a lot of people on the left really get wrong about this is that keeping channel crossings going is not the compassionate thing whatsoever. The compassionate thing is stopping it, because month after month we have deaths in the channel, people risking their lives, sometimes young children even drowning. It is an absolute heartbreaking travesty, and it needs to stop. And the compassionate thing is really stopping the people on the beaches. And that is why I think that obviously Calais and northern France is a very big coastline, but I think, goodness me, they need to plough a lot more resources into trying to stop these things, because ploughing resources into smashing the gangs, which seems to be Labour's strategy at the moment, is just not working. And I think that gangs are very, very ruthlessly ingenious and will always find a way to skirt around whatever latest fad the government and police and border were doing. Governments across the world have ploughed literally billions into stopping the global drug trade. And, today it is just as easy to get a bag of weed on the street corner as it ever has been. And so I think that tactic, while it is noble, and I don't doubt that Keir Starmer really loathes these gangs, I think that you have to have maybe a bit of smashing the gangs, but also a big deterrent, and you have to make Britain a much less attractive place to come to.
Why do you think there is such reticence about actually taking boats back to France? Clearly, we've given them, when you look at all the various tranches of funding that have gone from the United Kingdom across the Channel, nigh on €1 billion to do their part in stopping these boats from leaving their shores. The Belgian police seem to be able to do it just fine. The French, however, seem to be pretty hopeless. Why can't we declare a state of national security, looking at, for instance, the fact that 3 Iranian nationals who had a bomb plot foiled had come over on small boats, and actually return these boats to France and say, you're not taking us seriously, this is what we're going to do?
Someone quite senior, actually, in government the other day was hypothecating about what would happen if a migrant boat decided to turn back and go to France. What would happen then? Would they take them back to Britain, or would they just let them land and then let them claim asylum? Who knows? That is the question. Obviously, the Reform Party have said that they would, just have a go at just dragging the boats back to France and see what happened. I don't imagine that Emmanuel Macron would take too kindly to that. What would then happen? I don't know. A massive diplomatic row with the French. But I don't, there seems to be different interpretations of the law on this one. Reform seem pretty confident in their position that they could do this. Obviously, the government's lawyers are absolutely opposed. And I think what would happen is that you'd see the civil service and totally down tools in terms of hoping this to happen. But it's obviously an idea which I think that many people say the exact same thing as you do. They look at this in such frustration and they just go, why on earth can we not just take them back straight away? Why on earth can we just not stop them coming here? But, it's obviously a very complicated legal matter, which the government are grappling with.
And there seems to be a bit of a ding-dong within Labour at the moment as to what happens to migrants when migrant hotels are closed down. Are they all going to be disseminated into the community? There are reports, actually, that the government's planning on actually just buying hotels.
Yeah, and the government were last night strongly pushing back on that, denying those reports. I mean, I don't know why, if you were a migrant hotel owner at the moment, you'd sell up. You're absolutely making a fortune at the moment. You've probably never made a killing so big because the government are paying extraordinary amounts of money every single day to basically buy out these hotels, to rent them out for migrants. But yes, in terms of the actual closing down asylum hotels, I think that people were quite disappointed when Rachel Reeves said that we're still going to have them essentially by 2029, despite the fact when she came into government, Labour was saying they try and close migrant hotels down in their first year. It's still going to cost about £12.6 billion in asylum costs over the next 4 years while they get these hotels closed down. And the most shocking thing about it is they don't seem to really have a plan for where all these migrants will go, because it's predicated the £1 billion savings on two things. One, that they can process people quicker and get rid of the backlog. Well, if more people cross the channel and claim asylum, that backlog is not going to go down. It is going to go up. And at the moment, there are record crossings. But it's also predicated on the fact they can find cheaper accommodation for people. And so moving them out of hotels into some other form of accommodation. The big problem with that is, at the moment, the government don't seem to know what. And Rachel Reeves was asked yesterday exactly what kind of cheaper accommodation do you have in mind, and she said, "Well, I don't know. That's for the Home Office to sort out." So what's it going to be? Is it going to be disused tower blocks? Is it going to be student accommodation? In the Number 10 briefing yesterday, we even asked about tents. Is tents a possibility? And they said we just don't know at the moment. And so I think that at the moment it's very fuzzy in terms of actually how they're going to be able to close down these asylum hotels and where the asylum seekers will go to.
It also seems relatively fuzzy how many gangs Sir Keir Starmer's managed to smash, because my understanding is many of these dinghies are made custom built for the particular purpose of cramming people on and crossing the channel. They're shipped across various countries before they are kept in warehouses in Germany, because Germany has a political sensitivity when it comes to surveillance and police surveillance of things. And so you wonder what cooperation is actually taking place, how many of these gangs have been foiled in their operations. We're not really getting many updates to that end.
No, and they seem to have gone a bit quiet on this Border Security Command. We know it's got hundreds of millions of pounds, and it's getting about another £580 million over the course of the next Parliament. In terms of the actual work it's doing, I do have some sympathies with respect that they probably can't get into the actual operational details of what is going on the ground. But I think that it would be sort of confidence boost to a lot of people in the country who look at this with complete despair if they could give us some update about, we've smashed this smuggling gang, we've smashed that smuggling gang. They are actually often providing updates about sort of criminal operations in the UK and illegal working and that side of it here. But actually, what's going on in France, what's happening upstream, because a lot of these gangs are they're not based in France, they're based somewhere in the Middle East or somewhere like that. And that's where lots of the trafficking starts anyway. But I think you're right. A lot of people at the moment, a lot of the public are just lacking faith in this.
They are indeed. Jack Elson, political editor of The Sun, thank you ever so much. I mean, it's never a positive update whenever you talk about the broken borders, is it? Some of your messages now. Mike in Colchester says, why does the UK government give £500 million to France annually without an agreed signed contract, legally committing the French to specific actions and results? It just goes to show how incompetent successive governments have been on this matter. I agree with you entirely. I mean, the government do seem... I wouldn't pay my builder before they had finished building my house. Do you know what I mean? I might give money as they go along, but you expect results. If you're paying someone to conduct a particular service, you expect them to be able to demonstrate that they are doing just that. Why on earth would France want to keep loads of illegals? Alex, flip it around. Imagine Border Force stopping dinghies heading to France. Brits would be tearing their hair out. There'd be riots in Dover before lunchtime. I mean, I'd imagine if boats were going back the other direction, I bet the French would intercept them. I reckon the French would drag them back to the United Kingdom. They're more than happy to intercept our fishing boats and keep those under lock and key in French harbours. But also, like I was saying earlier, I do think that there is reason for France to want to stop this, because there are so many people who have traipsed across Europe through various safe countries who end up in Calais. I don't know if you've been to Calais recently and driven around there off the beaten track. It's a bit of a hellhole, to be honest. And if they were stopping boats from crossing the channel, guess what? Those people would not be accumulating in Calais. One would figure out they'd have to go somewhere else. So actually, I think the French would have far fewer people coming illegally into France if there was no onward journey. That's what I think. Let me know what you think on the issue. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call if you would like to talk to me in person. That would be fantastic. It's your normal network rate. You can also use that number to send me a WhatsApp or indeed leave me a voice note on WhatsApp. 0344 499 1000. We can be texted. I hate the word text. It's not a word, is it? Texted. It just sounds so clunky. You can send us a text message to 87222 if you're going to do that. Remember to write the word talk before you write the body of your message. That way it manages to find its way around all of the various Iranian drones and Israeli missiles that are cluttering up the stratosphere at present, and wind its way down a mast on top of Talk Towers and here into this high-tech setup I have in front of me to be read out on air. That's also charged at your normal network rate. We're on X at talkTV. And after this set of advertisements, I will be back. So put the kettle on and I'll see you on the other side.
We have also, in the last hour or so, heard from the CEO of Air India, Campbell Wilson, who delivered a statement a bit earlier on. I'll read you some of it. He started by saying he'd like to express his deep sorrow about this event and what's been a difficult day for us at Air India. He also said we have a team working around the clock to support investigators and families in any way we can. He also went on to reiterate some of the things that we already know, that flight A171 was involved in an accident on departure from Ahmedabad airport shortly after, carrying 230 passengers.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello, welcome back. Now, I'm sure you're itching to find out how you could win tickets to the final of the FIFA Club World Cup. Well, thanks to our friends at DAZN, they're going to tell you everything you need to know in order to hopefully nab that prize.
Hi, it's Jim White here. Here at TalkSport, we're gearing up for the Club World Cup in the United States. And to celebrate, we've got 2 tickets to the final in New York on July the 13th to give away. We'll sort flights, accommodation, and give you £5,000 spending money to spend however you like. 18 plus, UK excluding Northern Ireland. All you have to do to enter is text the word football to 83338 by the 13th of June at 11 p.m. and you're in the draw. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission or send your name and number by post to Club World Cup Final Prize Draw, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on June the 18th.
This is a TalkSport limited competition run on TalkSport Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Is it just me, or does Jim's voice suddenly turn into Mike Graham's voice at the end of that cheeky little competition promo? I think it does. Anyway, don't miss out on that incredible giveaway. Thank you to our friends at DAZN. Good luck with all of that. Imagine that, going to New York, the Big Apple, with 5k in your pockets. I mean, I'd, live without going to see the football. I'm sure lots are out there. I would love to go and watch the soccer as well, as they say over there. But there you go. Good luck if you are indeed entering that competition. Let's take a call now and speak to Lawrence, who's in Colchester. Good morning, Lawrence.
Hello, Alex. It's a pleasure and an honour to talk to you, my dear.
Oh.
Wow. You want to stand for Parliament, sweetheart, and you'll get in for reform.
Oh, I'll tell you what, though, be careful what you wish for, because if you think people like Margaret Thatcher was the Iron Lady, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Exactly, and God bless her soul. She'd be turning in her grave, mate, seeing what's going on in our country at the moment.
Yeah, she would, wouldn't she? I mean, what is going on at the moment? Why on earth are we not able to sock it to France? And we've given them, over the course of a number of years, almost €1 billion now to do policing, and yet their version of policing is apparently to file their nails while gazing wistfully out to sea as migrant vessels merrily depart across the Channel. They clearly don't want to get their sort of Chanel shoes wet, do they?
No, you can't say it's a joke. It's absolutely disgusting. They're taking the mick, and that's putting it mildly, out of the British people. 2 things are going to happen here. Starmer and Macron are globalists. You can quite easily see that. Nothing's going to change with these migrants until Labour are out. And mark my words, on my granddad's deathbed, who got the George Medal in the Second World War, this lot will be out before their term is up.
Well, we can all dream, can't we? I mean, my concern about this whole thing, when you look at what's going on in Ballymena as well, is the public, not just in the United Kingdom, but across Europe, have had enough. If you were to Google the name of any Western European capital and then type in anti-immigration protest, you will find out that pretty violent uprisings, verging on insurrections, are taking place across the entirety of the West, frankly, about this issue. And my concern is that there's nothing actually being strategically done. You know, you're talking about perhaps the Labour Party might be pushed out of office before the end of their tenure. But then even if we got a brand new government who wanted to really grab the nettle over this issue, my concern is, first of all, there has to be so much done to untangle the Gordian knot of legislation. It's not just about getting out of the ECHR, although I would personally fully back that. You've then got to uproot the entire Human Rights Act. You've got to scrap all the case precedent that have happened. You've got to make sure our own High Court judges are not wet lefty liberals who seem to find any reason not to deport people. That in itself takes about 5 years. So we got...
You do what Trump's doing. It's as simple as that.
But this is my worry. This is my worry, Lawrence. If we've got 5 more years or 4 more years left of Labour, that's that down the drain, isn't it? And then once you've managed to put all the legislative change in place that might enable mass deportations to begin, that could well take up to another 5 years. And just like Donald Trump is seeing in America, I'm pretty sure the Socialist Workers' Party and all of their short fringe, blue-haired lunatic allies will be out with their posters campaigning, gluing themselves to tarmac, Lord knows what. Those High Court judges whose wings we need to clip will be the ones creating judicial reviews and blocking the government. I mean, I wonder...
Alex, you've got to have faith, darling. Okay?
Oh, I do have faith, but I tell you what I'm worried about.
The British people take too long to react, but I can assure you, and you know this, and the government know, the British people have had enough of it.
Oh.
They don't want it. If there's one more hit in this country, like that monster that did what he did, I won't even mention his name.
Yeah.
That'd be it.
Well, this is what I'm worried about, Lawrence. This is exactly what I'm worried about.
There will be riots that you haven't seen since the poll tax riots.
This is, do you know, Lawrence, I fear you are speaking the truth here. My concern is that that bung that was put in place, the fear struck into the heart of the general public after the government's crackdown on the Southport riots, those televised trials that took place, the political prisoners like who are still at this moment festering in prison for writing something online, like Lucy Connolly. I think that bung has only got a short time frame to it. I don't think the British people are going to sit idly by for another 10 years and wait for something to be done about this crisis. Oh, Lawrence.
Exactly. I agree with you 100%, Alex.
We live in troubled times, that's for sure. Lawrence, thank you ever so much for your call. Right, here we go. Got a bit of breaking for you now. Iran has said that Israel's attacks on its military and nuclear sites is a declaration of war. The Iranian military fired 100 drones at Israel just this morning as the opening salvo of an expected retaliation, which it pledged would be harsh and decisive. Israel overnight claimed to have hit 100 targets using 200 warplanes, striking one of Iran's nuclear facilities, wiping out dozens of its air defense systems and assassinating military top brass all together in one bunker. Russia, one of Iran's most key allies, called the attacks unprovoked and unacceptable and said they were particularly cynical 2 days ahead of the next round of nuclear talks with the US. Of course, Israel said that quite the opposite to that. They believed that Iran was very close to developing nuclear warheads within a matter of days, taking this opportunity to strike preemptively. Iran has announced it will no longer take part in those negotiations on Sunday. Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, said Israel has sealed for itself a bitter and painful destiny. Israel has declared a state of emergency across the entire country. It's told its citizens to remain near bomb shelters. General Ayal Zamir, the military chief, has warned that Iran's response would be worse than what we are used to, unlike the sort of performative theatre of exchanging various amounts of kinetics that we've seen in times past. This was a big concerted effort to strike Iran's nuclear bases when they didn't expect it. Should we have a little listen to Benjamin Netanyahu, the president of Israel, just earlier today?
Moments ago, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a targeted military operation to roll back the Iranian threat to Israel's very survival. This operation will continue for as many days as it takes to remove this threat. For decades, the tyrants of Tehran have brazenly, openly called for Israel's destruction. They've backed up their genocidal rhetoric with a program to develop nuclear weapons. In recent years, Iran has produced enough highly enriched uranium for 9 atom bombs. 9. In recent months, Iran has taken steps that it has never taken before, steps to weaponize this enriched uranium. And if not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months, less than a year. This is a clear and present danger to Israel's very survival.
Well, the latest from the UK government is that they're going to be holding a COBRA meeting today following the unravelling of events in the Middle East. But from what I understand, government sources saying that the United Kingdom will not be coming to Israel's defence during any retaliatory strike from Iran. However, Donald Trump, despite denying that America had any prior knowledge of these strikes and certainly did not sanction them, or that is the official line anyway, has promised to defend their ally in the form of Israel. Well, that is currently unfolding as we take place. The nuclear watchdog has called for maximum restraint from both sides, as indeed has the United Kingdom government. However, Iran are going to be forced to respond, and Israel saying that actually this is step one in a multi-day operation. There are more targets that they have planned. They've taken out Israel's air defense mechanisms. They've taken out military chiefs. They've taken out a number of nuclear facilities. But it seems to me that there is more that Israel wishes to do. So this is certainly not the end of this, and one has to wonder how Iran therefore is going to respond. The proxies are very much weakened, although they do still have capabilities in places like Iraq and Syria, allies there. But this is going to be the beginning of something, well, who knows, quite tense. We're going to be taking a short break now, but we're going to be continuing speaking about this on the other side with Jake Wallace-Simons. Don't go anywhere.
Is it transphobic to say only women have a cervix?
Well, it is something that shouldn't be said. It is not right. A woman is an adult female, and the court has made that absolutely clear. I actually welcome the judgment because I think it gives real clarity. It allows those that have got to draw up guidance to be really clear about what that guidance should say. If you want to fight for Remain, vote Labour. Now, there are some who say we don't need Brexit to work. We need to reverse it. I couldn't disagree more. Day after day, there are new allegations of sleaze, of favours, of privileged access. And it's all very well the Prime Minister saying, well, say now, well, I'm paying for it.
You've decided to repay £6,000 worth of gifts.
Lord Ali is facing an investigation. I wonder how concerned you are that your biggest donor was not fully transparent.
Are you saying you made a mistake?
It was right for me to make those repayments. Thank you. Of course, I wouldn't want Donald Trump round for dinner, but don't underestimate the danger to the world if Trump is re-elected this time around. I'm anti-Trump. I would like to send my warmest congratulations to President Trump on his inauguration as the 47th President of the United States.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is talk.
Well, hello, welcome back to the show. And today, very much the big headlines are geopolitical ones, given what unfolded overnight. Israel launching a number of targeted attacks on Iran, worried that within 15 days Iran could have developed nuclear warheads. Now, that is as Donald Trump was about to sit down with the regime and try and reforge the nuclear pact that the country once had, which it never seemed to uphold. Well, Donald Trump has now told Iran to make a deal before it's too late. This is after Israel launched waves of attacks, including a strike on Natanz, which is Tehran's enrichment facility, targeting the nuclear programs in Iran. Over 200 Israeli Air Force jets were part of this morning's strikes on Iran, dropping more than 300 munitions. Israel has also assassinated the head of Iran's armed forces, General Mohammad Bagheri, the chief of the military staff. He was killed alongside top commanders as well as 6 nuclear scientists. Well, Iran has launched their retaliation. So far, 100 drones have been flown in the direction of Israel. Most of them have already been intercepted. Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, said the campaign will continue for as many days as it takes, raising fears of all-out war. Meanwhile, we're holding a COBRA meeting back over here in the United Kingdom about escalating tensions in the Middle East. Don't know what we're bothering to discuss, considering a government source has already said that we're not going to be part of helping to defend Israel against Iranian retaliation, unlike the United States, who claim that they had no strategic oversight or a prior notification of Israel's planned operation, but will be there to protect its Middle Eastern ally. Well, let's speak to Jace Wallace-Simons, author of Israelophobia, the newest version of the oldest hatred, and what to do about it. Jake, good to have you on the programme. There are people saying that this has been rather rambunctious of Israel, yet again. A big gamble, perhaps. Lord knows how Iran's going to respond. However, people I speak to who are sort of close observers of geopolitics sort of say to me, well, actually, if not now, then when? Israel was extremely worried about the proliferation of uranium in Iran and the time frame that Tehran needed in order to construct nuclear weapons. Putting it down, perhaps, as in 15 nuclear bombs within days. Meanwhile, we know that Donald Trump was going to go and try and have negotiations with Iran. People thought that perhaps the reason for Iran coming to the table was to buy time, to protract those negotiations while it continued to furiously enrich uranium. Do you think that that is true, that Israel has actually taken an opportunity when it could, and it was very much a preemptive strike in self-defense?
Well, this has been a problem that's been around not just for the past couple of years, but for the past few decades. Israel has been exceedingly patient, as anybody observing events will confirm, for decades after decade, while the Iranian regime has not just been pursuing overtly and covertly nuclear weapons, but it's also been vowing openly to destroy Israel. In Philistine Square in central Tehran, there is a clock counting down to September the 9th, 2040, which was when the Ayatollah prophesied that Israel would meet its end, would be destroyed by Iran. These are fanatics. They have a theology by which they are aiming to get the apocalypse underway, starting with an attack on Israel, so that a mythical figure called the Mahdi will emerge from invisibility and lead the faithful to Islamic victory over the world. That's what they're aiming for with nuclear weapons, with ballistic missiles, and also with overseas militia. That's what we're dealing with. That's what Israel has been dealing with as being first in the firing line. Israel sat back, has not attacked the nuclear program, has let it get to this point where 15 nuclear bombs could be produced within a matter of months or even weeks, and has finally been forced to take action.
Is it going to be enough, though? It's got to be a fairly comprehensively executed strategy if it's going to prevent Iran from accelerating its desire to have nuclear weapons. One might think that this would be, well, beyond provocative if you're targeting a hostile state. I personally agree with the approach that Israel's taking. I don't understand why the West is so lily-livered about helping it. But given how fanatical Iran are, given that they don't really care about stuff like civilian casualties, given that they are quite bloodthirsty and gung-ho, how do we know for certain that they don't have any sort of capabilities to retaliate, and retaliate in a dangerously decisive way?
Well, one of the things about Iran is that the majority of the Iranian people loathe the regime and support Israel. It's a minority regime of fanatics that exerts its power across the country with brutal and sadistic methods. So that means that it's a very easy country for Israel to penetrate in terms of intelligence operations. The Mossad has had huge and spectacular successes in Iran over the last few decades, and those have only been more and more impressive as time has gone on. So I think that Israel knows everything about Iran that it needs to know. It was able to totally disable its air defense systems, its strategic air defense systems, last October in a succession of pinpoint strikes. And in fact, these current attacks that we've seen over the last 24 hours were not just carried out by hundreds of airstrikes. They were also carried out by Mossad teams on the ground, conducting close-range operations with precision missiles fired from vehicles, fired from the land, and also fired from quadcopters, which carry a high degree of explosives operating on a short distance, and the team that launches them melts away, causes maximum damage with minimal implications. So Israel has completely penetrated the Iranian regime. It knows exactly what it's dealing with. Iran launched 100 drones in the last few hours. All of them have been shot down already by Israel and its allies, including the Saudis, but not including, shamefully, Britain. Israel knows what to expect. We're going to have a tense few days ahead, but Israel, the IDF has recently said in the last hour or so that everything's under control.
Yeah, might the British thinking here be the idea that, as the IDF was saying, everything is under control, that they are well equipped to defend themselves and Iran is militarily weakened, and that actually, for domestic reasons, to try and prevent reprisals perhaps on our own streets, that the UK government have decided it might be more pragmatic to openly state it will not be coming to Israel's aid?
Well, I think there's only one reason why Britain has not said it will come to Israel's aid, and that is cowardice, sheer cowardice. We saw Britain help Israel before when it was under attack by the Iranians last year, but it's not doing so again out of cowardice. The Prime Minister and David Lammy have both gone on the record extensively in recent months talking about the grave threat that Iran poses, not just to Israel, but to the West as well. We've seen terror attacks foiled on our soil, kidnap plots foiled on our soil. I personally have spoken to high-ranking British security officials who've said that Iran, above all, is the threat that keeps them awake at night. We know what that threat is, and yet we're not getting involved because of the overwhelming hostility towards Israel that's only been growing in the British establishment, despite the fact that Israel is on the front line against fanatical jihadism that is coming for us too. Israel is doing us all a favour by fighting these guys so that we don't have to. The least we could do is throw our support behind the Jewish state.
We know that America is now going to do that in terms of trying to intercept the retaliatory measures from Iran. However, Donald Trump has stressed that America was not notified of this particular operation. That's the official line anyway. But he has now put on Truth Social, knowing that in theory there's supposed to be further discussions with Iran. Those talks, I believe, are all but dead in the water now about a nuclear deal. But he has put on his Truth Social platform, "I gave Iran chance after chance to make a deal. I told them in the strongest words to just do it. But no matter how hard they tried, no matter how close they got, they just couldn't get it done. I told them it would be much worse than anything they know, anticipated, or were told, that the United States makes the best and most lethal military equipment anywhere in the world, by far, and that Israel has a lot of it, with much more to come, and they know how to use it. Certain Iranian hardliners spoke bravely, but they didn't know what was about to happen. They're all dead now, and it will only get worse. There has already been great death and destruction, but there is still time to make this slaughter, with the next already planned attacks being even more brutal, come to an end. Iran must make a deal before there's nothing left and save what was once known as the Iranian Empire. No more death, no more destruction, and in typical Donald Trump capitalisation, just do it before it is too late. God bless you all," he ends. I mean, tough talk there from the American president. He might claim to have not been strategically notified as to what Israel was planning in this particular operation, but he seems to be hinting to, or not just hinting, but stating quite brazenly to Iran that he knows that Israel is going to carry on and that Iran's got to come to the table or got to do something, because Israel has no intention of holding back.
Well, it's quite obvious that the Americans knew what was going to happen, because yesterday they evacuated non-essential personnel from their embassies throughout the Middle East in anticipation of this attack. So they knew what was going on. We've seen the Israel's skies defended by the Saudis, by the Americans and other allies. They obviously were prepared. They knew what was going to happen. This sort of operation was conducted by thousands of Israeli military personnel, intelligence, air force and others. None of this leaked out. In fact, Israel did some war games. The Israeli Air Force did some war games over the sea within the last 24 hours. The Iranians saw that, but in their complacency, didn't think that this time it was going to be real, it was going to happen. They thought it was just a negotiating tactic. So look, the Iranians were asleep at the wheel. Trump definitely knew what was going to happen. But at this point, it could go in a number of ways. One way in which we could see this going is that if Israel needs help in getting to the very deep underground nuclear facilities, the ones that are deepest buried, we could see the US helping with their B-2 bombers dropping the Moabs, the mother of all bombs, the biggest bunker busters on Earth, which only the Americans have. We could see them giving those to the Israelis to help out with that. We could see the Americans coming into the war if Iran does retaliate with any degree of success, which looks unlikely at the moment. But I would also say that we could see these negotiations beginning to bear fruit. It sounds absurd now that the Iranians have been humiliated and are on their back foot. But the Israelis have been arguing for some time that, yes, a deal is vital with Iran to try to bring it to some degree into the international community safely, but you've got to get rid of the nuclear program first. That's got to be a non-negotiable first step towards rehabilitating Iran. So it's not necessarily the end of the road with regard to the negotiations, but right now the Iranians are humiliated, they're angry, they raised the red flag of revenge above their mosque in central Tehran, which seemed like a rather futile and pathetic move. But, you know, is there a sting in the tail? We don't know. But so far it seems like the Israelis very much have the upper hand, and the US, at the very least, has their back, even if UK doesn't.
Yeah, and it seems to me that Israel is still continuing to target various particular locations in Iran. There's been another attack against the nuclear facilities being reported by Iranian state television. This is going to go on for a number more days, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it was planned initially to last between 4 days and a week. It looks like it's going according to plan so far. It isn't going to be over quickly. I mean, the one thing that I would note about the Israeli attacks is that they are more extensive than many people would have expected. They've targeted not just the nuclear program, but also the Iranian defense apparatus. In fact, they started by targeting the Iranian defense command structure, a bit like the playbook that was used against Hezbollah, taking out the command structure first and then the stockpiles of weapons. And as a measure of the deception that successfully was used against the Iranians, all of these people were killed at home. They had no idea this was coming. They'd seen Israeli war games over the sea. They'd seen people talking about what Israel could do to Iran if it wanted to in recent days, but they didn't take the hint. They stayed at home. They didn't go into bomb shelters, didn't go to the army HQs. They were all taken out in their beds. That was done first, and after that, the nuclear facilities were targeted by Israel. Obviously, the reason is because Israel wants to prevent a full-scale retaliation from Iran that might be threatening to its own citizens on its own soil. So it's very, very strategic in that way. But it's much more extensive than simply a surgical strike on the nuclear facilities. It seems like, although Israel's been open about not seeking to gain regime change in Iran, it does seem like that is not unlikely at the moment. The news that we're getting from inside Iran is great jubilation, huge celebration of Israel strikes, great support for Israel. There's a lot of love between the downtrodden Iranian people, Iranian women who can't go out onto the streets and with their hair uncovered and so forth, between them and the Israelis. Now, will they topple the regime? That's really the next big question that we're waiting to see the answer to in the region.
If they did topple the regime, who's going to essentially take over?
Well, that's an excellent question. And Khamenei, although he is a fanatic, a hardliner, a murderous, evil leader, he's not the worst that the Iranian regime has to offer. In fact, in recent months, he's been under pressure himself from hardliners within the Revolutionary Guards who've said, why are you talking to the Iranians, to the Americans about the nuclear program? We've been humiliated by the Israelis. They've destroyed Hezbollah. They've taken out our air defenses. They're winning in Gaza, and it's all your fault. Let's get more hardline. Let's get more brutal. And he's been trying to in a way, walk this tightrope of keeping the Americans at the negotiating table while also delivering hardline rhetoric to appease his even more fanatical base, the kind of creature that he gave birth to that he can no longer barely control. So if he were to go, it would be a bit of a toss-up as to whether even more hardline factions would take over, or whether the regime would collapse completely. That it would collapse completely. There are a number of potential candidates for a new Iranian leadership, including the grandson of the former Shah of Iran, who's currently in exile in the West, but who's got a lot of support in Iran and in the diaspora. It's not impossible that this could be the beginning of the collapse of the tyrannical regime in Tehran, and the beginning of something that approaches something more democratic and palatable to the West, with whom we could have peace between not just the UK and Iran, but Israel and Iran. That would be a wonderful future, that this could be the bloody beginning of a wonderful future.
Well, let's all hope that you're right, and that is how things are going to play out. Jake Wallace-Simons, thank you ever so much for coming on the programme. OK, we're going to be taking a short break now, but then when I come back, we're going to be focusing on domestic politics and what's been going on in the corridors of power in the Palace of Westminster with Henry Hill, Deputy Editor of Conservative Home. That's after this.
The flight was leaving the southwesterly runway on the way to Gatwick, and as you said, it got to about 625 feet. Now, normally when these aircraft are getting airborne, normally for sound reasons, they do a very steep climb. Most passengers will know when they get airborne for their holidays, the aircraft go on a steep climb after takeoff up to 1,000 feet or beyond. So this clearly only managed about halfway up there and then crashed about 2 kilometres away from the airfield, so very close. The aircraft would have been at its most vulnerable because it would have been absolutely crammed full of fuel at the time.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Now, it would be rather wrong of me to say that I had favourites, but I probably do. And I think my favourite audience on Talk has to be the mid-morning audience, because you guys, you're so erudite, you're so tuned into your politics. You like the hardline stuff, don't you? And who is more hardline than our queen in residence, Ms. Julia Hartley-Brewer, who is the doyenne of the mid-morning show. I but attempt to fill her boots on a Friday. But really, I don't stand a chance, because there's some pretty big size 12s. Anyway, if you, like me, are a huge fan of the wonderful Hartley-Brewer, then why not subscribe to the Julia Hartley-Brewer show on YouTube, on Talk's own channel on YouTube, and never miss a moment of her pinpoint grilling accuracy, her bold opinions and her fantastic analysis. She really is one of the UK's sort of veterans when it comes to talking straight and delivering the news in a way that most of the legacy media just, well, can't even get close to. So if you, like me, are a huge fan of the mid-morning show, then go ahead onto the Talk channel on YouTube and subscribe to the Julia Hartley-Brewer Show. All right, let's talk now about domestic politics, and let's talk about Sir Keir Starmer, because it turns out that he said that he was going to put all these taxes on private schools, this VAT, and that it's all going to go into funding state schools, and yet it doesn't seem that everyone's singing from that hymn sheet. Just the other day, there's been a suggestion that actually, oh no, this is going to be used in Labour's big housing project. Oh, all this extra money that we're going to be filling our coffers with, we're going to use that to build new houses. Well, Laura Trott, who's the Shadow Education Secretary, has smashed the Labour Party by saying, hang about, you're supposed to be using all this money to furnish state schools. Now you're saying it's going into housing, and we all know where the housing goes, don't we? That's right, it goes to those people who have just rocked up yesterday, not the native Brits. Let's speak now to Henry Hill, Deputy Editor of Conservative Home. I mean, this has really been a bit of a disaster because more private school pupils have had to leave the private school education system than anticipated. A number of private schools have had to shut down. And in the manifesto, with this tax, it promised to Labour promised to hire 6,500 new state school teachers. With the new amount of students who are now having to go to state schools because their parents can't put them in private education anymore, it's not going to make a jot of difference, is it?
No, and I mean also the government's having a problem recruiting the teachers. It's really having to it's just announced that it's going to exclude primary school teachers from the target, despite the fact that there is a massive shortage. And it has, I think, to date, this policy has forced twice as many formerly private school pupils as expected into the state sector. And of course, the critical thing about that is that a private school pupil doesn't actually take any taxpayers' money for their education. Whereas every state school pupil, I think the average national spend per pupil is about £7,000, which means that either when these people move in, the government needs to find more taxpayers' money to keep that level the same, or means less money for everyone else. This is one of those policies which was always a bit small and a bit spiteful and a bit Labour picking on an easy target. During the general election, they were cowardly. They refused to say that they were going to raise taxes. So they said they wouldn't raise any of the big revenue taxes, and they alighted on this and the non-DOMS one as the taxes they thought that people would like them doing. The non-DOMS one has cost this country a lot of money as highly mobile, high net worth individuals leave, and this one is on track to do broadly the same thing.
Well, it's purely ideologically driven, but when put in the context of how much money it actually raises for the Treasury, it seems to be net zero. On the subject of net zero, Kemi Badenoch has come out swinging against the windfall tax on oil companies, saying that it had its time, it had its place. Back when Russia first invaded Ukraine and energy costs soared, and there was a big argument, wasn't there, about whether or not these energy companies who were making enormous profits, billions, from that horrific war taking place in Ukraine, should have to pay tax on it. Well, Kemi Badenoch has now called for the windfall tax on North Sea oil and gas to be scrapped. She says that the profits levy can no longer be justified and there'd be nothing left to tax if it's continued. I mean, this is Kemi Badenoch beginning to sort of wade into Reform UK's territory, isn't it? Wanting North Sea oil and gas to be restored and saying that at the moment it doesn't make sense for us to be importing oil and gas from other countries when there's 1.5 billion barrels of oil under our seabed.
Yeah, the windfall tax was a very strange decision because essentially, one, it was trying to blame the companies for what is essentially British government failure. You know, there are lots of other countries in Europe which were negatively affected by the war in Ukraine. Britain still has, by some margin, the most expensive energy in Europe, and that's down to policy failures by governments. The other problem, of course, is that investing in developing a North Sea oil plant, field, is very expensive. It is a very high-cost, time-consuming investment. And at the time, we justified the previous taxes, lots of the previous already quite high taxation that we had on North Sea oil and gas, with the idea that, oh, but look how much money you might be able to make from it. And then, of course, when they started making that money, the politicians in power at the time, who hadn't benefited from any of the previous taxes, decided to whack a windfall tax on it. The fact is, in an unstable, uncertain 21st century, which is definitely the 21st century we've got, it is absolutely absurd for a nation like us, which could still be a substantial global energy exporter and domestic consumer, to be rendering ourselves more dependent on long-distance supply lines, on countries in the Middle East, and on some uncertain and expensive renewable technologies. And I'm in favor of developing those technologies, when we still have huge natural reserves which we could be exploiting, both to bring down energy costs, to bring in tax revenue, and indeed simply to stabilise our own position internationally.
Is there not a bit of a problem with Kemi Badenoch's approach at the moment, that she just seems to be reverberation on the line? We had just last week Nigel Farage up in Scotland talking about this subject, among many others, saying that efforts to achieve net zero were complete and utter madness. And then, hey-ho, just a week later in her keynote speech to the Scottish Tory conference in Edinburgh, she's basically echoing similar sentiments. It was the same thing when there was a row that emerged after Reform UK's newly elected MP Sarah Poachin questioned Sir Keir Starmer in PMQs about whether he would look into banning the burqa, and then, hey-ho, there's Kemi Badenoch writing an article about it in the Telegraph. Is she just sitting there waiting to see what Reform does and then a week later copies them?
Well, in Kemi's defence on this one, her position on net zero has been her position for some time. And if there's one place you're going to be talking specifically about North Sea oil, it is the Scottish Conservative Conference, which is where she was making those remarks. But it is a fair charge. And I think the challenge, for one of the challenges for Kemi, is simply that because she was elected quite explicitly with no particular policy programme, and the Conservative Party under her leadership is deliberately taking quite a long time to develop a policy programme. That means, because you can't simply have zero policies for 2 years, because what on earth are you going to talk about, that you end up having to respond to the news cycle. So, she was saying, oh, well, we're going to take our time, we're not going to come up with any policies. And then when she needed something to say on the second reading of the Border Security Bill, all of a sudden the Conservatives have a brand new policy on doubling the length of time of indefinite leave to remain, without waiting for the review. And I think this is the same thing. It's not necessarily that she is literally just waiting to see what Nigel Farage says about anything. I fully believe that she would have come to this particular position on her own. But it's that she needed something to say at the Scottish Conservative Conference, or she needed something to say when it was in the newspapers, because the Conservatives need to get media attention. And so it does end up looking, because it often is, very reactive. You're not getting the impression of somebody with a fully worked out agenda who's trying to sell you on it. You've got the impression of somebody who's just seeing what everyone's talking about and then trying to make it look like they're talking about it as well.
I love the fact that just in that last bit where you were talking there, we had cows up on screen. I do love cows. There's a little baby one as well. One assumes they're representing the methane being farted into the atmosphere by bovines. Right, let's talk now about a lot of other guff, which is Rachel Reeves yesterday admitting she's got no clue where channel migrants are going to go instead of hotels. She's vowed that she will scrap the costly use of hotels within 4 years as part of her spending review. We've heard that all before. But she's not really able to say what would replace them, and instead said, oh, well, that's up to the Home Secretary. She said, I'm not going to be providing the accommodation. That's for the Home Office to do. Well, if you're going to get rid of hotels, you better have some idea of what you're going to replace them with. My concern here is we know what is going to replace the hotels, which is private rental accommodation in a housing market that's already stretched. We've heard we need to build millions more houses to accommodate the native-born population, yet alone all the people coming to live in this country legally or illegally every single year. And my concern with this, Henry, is the fact that I hate the idea of migrant hotels, OK? I don't think any of them should be housed in any sort of accommodation here particularly. But at least with a migrant hotel, they were all in the same place and able to be surveilled. And many of these migrant hotels tended to be slightly out of town. My concern is when young men are being put in multi-residence properties, multi-occupancy properties, that they're going to be in the heart of communities. No one's going to know what they're getting up to in those houses, and that the risk actually to society and the amount of societal disruption could be even greater.
It's crazy. It's literally the government going, well, people don't like the hotels thing, and what the hotels thing is shorthand for, we don't like having huge numbers of illegal migrants being stored close to where we are and in our communities. And they're just like, oh, well, it's the hotels thing that's the problem. So what if we distributed them around private housing instead? There's two sides to this. One, what this country has needed for a very long time, given the chronic problems with deportations and the sheer number of people coming here, is a purpose-built asylum estate, right? It can be out of the way, out in the countryside. It can have proper facilities. It's not inhumane. You could have nice facilities even. You could have medical facilities, things to look after children, make sure children are looked after properly, but it would be self-contained. It would be run by the Home Office. It would be out of the way. It would be, as you say, easy to keep people there and stop them absconding, disappearing into the black economy if their claim doesn't succeed. But the other one is, where's the money coming from? Because when they say, oh, we're going to end the expensive use of asylum hotels, well, all right. But if you put them in private accommodation, these people aren't allowed to earn money in Britain. They're not allowed to work because, otherwise they'd just be bypassing the immigration system and getting straight into the economy. So how are they going to pay for private accommodation? They're not. The government is going to do it. Which bit of the government is going to do it? Rachel Reeves just cut the Home Office's budget. So if she's saying that I'm no longer going to be providing money for asylum hotels, but she's cut the Home Office budget, which is already slightly overstretched, which would have to pay for the private accommodation, what do you do? I mean, it leads to the kind of worrying, the one way out of that without them finding money from somewhere else is that they just start rubber stamping all of the applications and let them work and say, well, now they're no longer the government's problem because they can go and earn money and rent privately. But that means that they've completely bypassed the immigration system. They've hand-waved everybody through. And those people, as you say, are now going to be competing with young people from this country for very limited rental accommodation.
Yeah, I mean, not just that. I just hate to think of what it'd be like for a young woman living by herself or a young mum who all of a sudden down their street, the 5 young men from very different countries, all living together in a house without a job. What on earth do you think they're going to get up to? I would fancy they're probably not going to enrol on an open university course and use their time wisely to improve their further education, which begs the question quite what many of these young men will find themselves getting up to within our neighbourhoods. Henry, thank you ever so much. Talking about the migrant crisis, well, things are looking pretty bleak in Northern Ireland. Rioters have attacked police on the 4th night of unrest in Ballymena. The family of the girl who was sexually assaulted by Romanian teens have pleaded with the rioters to end the violence as the town braces itself for a 4th night of chaos. We're going to be discussing those riots and quite what they mean for the future of stability in the United Kingdom after this break.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, you've probably noticed the pretty serious rioting that's been taking place in Ballymena in Northern Ireland. Masked youths have been hurling missiles in Portadown as officers vow to prosecute bigots and racists behind the carnage. The area is bracing itself for a fourth night of unrest. This comes after allegations that two young Romanian teens had orally raped a 14-year-old schoolgirl and that they had appeared in court with Romanian translators. That is how we are said to understand what nationality the perpetrators are. A lot of anger out there on the streets of Northern Ireland. Let's speak to John Burrows, who's a retired PSNA officer and former public order commander. John, I mean, the scenes unfolding in Northern Ireland are pretty fruity, aren't they? Do you think they're on the verge of sort of scaling down now, or is there still a lot of momentum left in those riots?
Good morning. There's potential momentum left. They've scaled down somewhat from the first couple of nights. That's largely because the police get their resources mobilised and they're starting able to get the resources in the right place. And second of all, I do think that the message goes out that there's going to be some consequences coming. 3 young people were charged, arrested and remanded. They're currently in prison. So I think that, plus a combination of the weather last night was wet and windy. So it's too early to say it's on a downward path. We'll see what the weekend brings.
Do we know who is behind the rioting? Is it just angry young locals? Do you think, looking at some of the footage, that they may have been infiltrated by organised gangs? Is there a whiff of the far right? We were told that after the Southport riots, that this was all about the far right and that they had planned all these various attacks, and yet those never materialised, and any links to the actual far right seem to have been refuted in retrospect. But do we know who these rioters are? Are they all from the local area, or is there a risk that there are other people who might be using this for their own particular advantage?
It's a little bit of a mixed picture. Certainly, there isn't a big far-right presence in Northern Ireland whatsoever. They don't get any votes here. So I don't think there's an organised far-right. I think there's, and it's never to excuse violence, but if we want to understand it, it's similar to the kind of dynamics you're seeing in parts of England in particular. There'll be certain areas where young men express a frustration, where there's senses of social cohesion that people say have changed, that migrant communities tend to be housed in a condensed area. So they'll say, look, Northern Ireland's 95% white, only 5% migrant, but those migrants tend to be in a condensed area. There's frustrations about housing policies and about the stuff you talked about, private housing going prioritised to migrants. So all of those stuff bubble. And there is an element of racism, and there's an element of recreational rioting, because young people can enjoy this kind of thing. When you add it all up together, whenever this tension that's been building, then we got the news that a 14-year-old girl had been horrendously assaulted, sexually assaulted, and that the suspects were from the Romani community. That's when this disorder broke out. So there's, I suppose, 2 things. One, you've got to deal with the disorder in the here and now in the criminal justice system. But when that is done and you police that out, there will be, of course, these underlying tensions that need to be, I suppose, explained, understood and managed.
Yes, you know, I must admit, looking at the footage, it reminds me of the Southport riots, where there seems to be a load of angry locals, and then yet somehow at the very front of these riots seem to be some young men suitably equipped with black balaclavas and paramilitary gear who look sort of in fine fettle and very athletic, and I do sometimes wonder, who are they? But, you know, this isn't going to be the end of rioting in the UK, is it? Because we've seen this pattern taking place across Europe now. There have been riots in France, in Germany, in Sweden, in Denmark, even in the Canary Islands, and that until the problem of sorting out the migrant crisis is really grappled with, that the general public are seething about this, that we now live in a very febrile atmosphere, and it only takes one particular incident to light the blue touch paper. And however much the crackdown is from the government, we saw it after Southport with the televised trials, however much they crack down on these riots in Northern Ireland. I fear that that particular bung of deterring the general public of going out on the streets and protesting when the next tragedy unfolds is not going to last for very long. It's only a temporary thing, and perhaps all we're going to see is more rioting and an even more draconian response by the UK government.
Yeah, I mean, there's really big stuff here. And by the way, some of the things you see in Northern Ireland, unfortunately, due to our history, there are people who actually learn how to riot well. They've watched it. And that's why they tend to be a little bit more sinister and orchestrated and well planned. It's unfortunately learned behaviour amongst a minority of people. And the police are very stretched now in dealing with this. I think there's a whole range of things in what you say, and you're absolutely right. You can police out a riot. You can use enforcement as a major deterrent in the here and now. But the next time that there is a high-profile sexual assault and the details come out and it's a foreign national, that touch paper that's underneath the surface gets relit again. And there's a job of work for politicians and others in society to deal with those issues. Until they do, and I'm not, by the way, excusing any of the violence, we often try and, I think one of the things of political correctness has been that if you had, for example, black knife crime, it is almost seen as quite clever and are thoughtful to try and explain the underlying sociological reasons why young black men get drawn into that particular crime. No one says, oh, you're excusing the crime. I think when people try and explain why young white men get drawn into violence linked to immigration, there's almost a sense of, oh, you can't explain it, otherwise you're justifying it. And I think that's something we're going to have the courage to go and talk about these issues, have a proper public debate about them and get solutions to different concerns. But it doesn't change the fact violence is wrong and some of this is naked racism. But you're quite right. Underlying this are issues that need addressed.
Are you surprised at the level of societal breakdown and these patterns of unrest taking place across Europe? Because, I mean, I've been speaking for a while that we seem to be teetering on the brink of insurrection, quite frankly, of instability, the societal fabric being torn apart. The general public have run out of patience. They've been denied any democratic means, really, to feel like the policies that they want enacted are being enacted. They vote time and time again for parties that claim they're going to clamp down on illegal migration and cut the numbers of legal migration, and time again that doesn't happen, and that this is only going to continue to escalate. Has the speed at which we are now seeing pretty violent protests erupting across Europe, does that alarm you? Does that take you by surprise?
I think it's been building for some time, and there is a generation who feel left behind. They feel that society is not out for them, that they're bottom of the queue for housing and for education, and that almost they're looked down upon. And I think there's a very visual thing around the small boats. You know, I picked that up. That is a very. It doesn't even matter what percentage of illegal immigration comes in that way. It is such a visual perception of impunity that you can simply rock up on a boat and enter the country illegally, and next thing you're in a hotel, and that is a real sense of frustration. And look, it doesn't affect many of us who are. I live a fairly comfortable lifestyle, a nice detached house, a nice garden. This doesn't affect me on a daily basis. But where you see the rioting is actually where people are feeling the pinch in services, in housing, in other public services, in jobs, in employment, in education. And that pinch point is where you see the violence. But there is a real conversation to be had about immigration and those other issues. But of course, none of that excuses violence. But, you know, you should have an honest conversation about what underlies the tension that has these young people committing these very serious crimes. And by the way, many of them will face years in prison. And that is a tragedy. It's right that people are faced consequences, but you're going to have young people in prison for many years as a result of this.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a tragedy all round. You say it doesn't necessarily affect you, but I'll tell you this much, John. It affects me in as much as every single woman out there concerned about the safety and integrity of girls in this country who deserve to be brought up in a free society where they're not at risk of the incident that triggered this unrest. I mean, I think many women out there now are beginning to realise that we've created some sort of dire situation for women in the United Kingdom and across Europe.
And by the way, when I say that, it's not me saying it in a, you know, without empathy. I'm trying to explain, I think, while there is a disconnect between how some view an issue and others, because your experience is very different. And often the people who frame policy live in liberal, middle-class areas, and they're unaffected by some of the issues that affect those who are actually out in the street. So, I do think there's a connection needed in UK politics between certain communities that feel left behind and those who are in charge of the country.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't agree more. John Burrows, retired PSNI officer and former public order commander. What are your thoughts on these riots in Ballymena? I just wrote a piece on my Substack the other day about, there's an incredible professor of war called Professor David Betts, who had projected that the United Kingdom could be in civil war within 5 years, spoke about disparate gangs, mini militias, a sort of clash between the countryside elite and the poor urban native dwellers. And I remember reading that report and thinking, blimey, but actually seeing that he could well be right, that it only takes one particular incident to now trigger societal outrage, which could lead to insurrection. And you see the scenes unfolding in Ballymena. You remember the scenes of the riots in Southport. And like I said, try this little experiment. Google any Western European capital city, type in anti-immigration protests, and you will see that scenes unfolding in Northern Ireland are taking place all the time now across Europe. And you have to ask yourself this: unless they deal with the frustrations, unless they deal with the problems, unless they deal with the massive migratory flows that underpin this societal unrest, this is not going to stop. This is only going to get worse. This is going to escalate. I personally have no interest in living in London anymore. I'm sick to death now of the crime levels. I'm sick to death of not feeling safe. And I'm sick to death of living in fear that it's only a matter of time before the streets of London are being looted and raided and violently attacked. That we do feel like we live in a particularly febrile atmosphere, and that we mustn't underestimate, actually, the levels of anger that have built up within the native-born population. What are your thoughts on all of this? 0344 499 1000. That is the number to dial, charged at the normal network rates. You can also use that number to send me a WhatsApp message or leave me a voice note on WhatsApp on any of the topics that we're talking about today. But this one especially, I mean, I remember sitting here in this studio during those Southport riots, how nervous it made me, how uncomfortable, how I was worried about every word coming out of my mouth. It felt like broadcasting at gunpoint at times, because the atmosphere was so tense. People were being arrested for speaking out, for protesting, for putting things on social media. And when you sit in this booth for 3 hours by yourself and you're accountable only to yourself as to what comes out of your mouth, it was a very disturbing time to be at the helm of HMS Talk. And I remember the trepidation I felt then and what I feel now when I look at what's going on in Ballymena, because I know in my gut that this is not a one-off, that that's not going to be the last riot that takes place in the United Kingdom. That is not going to be the last atrocity or tragedy that is blamed upon someone who's come into this country from abroad, that this is not going to suddenly quell the situation. There is no silver bullet. The government hasn't got a rabbit to pull out of a hat or a genie that it can project from a lamp or something up their sleeve to suddenly make it better. That I worry intensely, actually, about the future of Europe, looking at this unrest and realising that this isn't going to be the last of it. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call or to WhatsApp 87222. If you want to send me a text message, you've got to write the word talk before your message. We're on X at talkTV, and your thoughts and your calls after this.
I'm at the post-mortem room. I will show you the current situation of the post-mortem room. You can see all relatives of the survivors, or they all are here since morning, and everybody is looking for the relatives. Particularly if we talk about the flight, it was Indian Airlines, and 242 passengers were on board, and this is the current situation is at the post-mortem room.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello, let's hit up the phone line, shall we, and speak to Karen, who is in Bournemouth. Good morning to you, Karen. Hey, Karen. Wow, Karen is a bit of a ghost, but don't worry, because the woman of the hour, she's always here for me whenever I ask for your calls. It's one of my favourites. It's Georgina in London. Hello, Georgina.
Hello, my darling. Great to see you. I wish it was under happier circumstances. I've been watching this horrific rioting that's been going on in Ballymena, and I can understand these parents. When it comes to the safety of your children, I think that is the last straw, Alex, and people will take a stand against migration. This is force-fed migration. We're being force-fed. Illegal migration has been allowed to infiltrate both England and Ireland to a catastrophic degree, and crime has increased. There's no doubt about it, especially bodily assaults on women and girls. And the general public will not be gaslighted anymore, either by the government or biased media. I haven't heard the Prime Minister address the problems in depth. He just keeps reiterating the same old rhetoric about smashing the gangs, to the tune of yet another 270 million on top of what we're already giving to France to protect our borders. But the problem is getting worse by the day, and rest assured, my darling, these problems that we are seeing in Ireland are only a hair's breadth away from coming here. Our women and girls have got to be safe within our borders, Alex, of our own country, without threat of sexual attack, and this government is still doing nothing.
Well, you're preaching to the converted, Georgina. I've been banging on about this for a long old time. I'll tell you what, so I went to Gloucestershire on Wednesday because I'm moving there. Like I said, I've had enough of London. I'm going to make the commute into London to work, but it's going to be a long one. But believe you me, I'm done with living in this city. I'm done with being harassed. I'm done with being leered at. I'm done with basically every single shop on the thoroughfare near to where I live is being boarded up or has to have certain produce behind lock and key because they're looted, something that's only just happened in the last 6 months. I am done with the dirt on the street, with the low-level crime. I'm done with the fact that someone smashed into my car the other day and has just disappeared. And guess what? No one is prepared to do anything about it, even though the pub CCTV points directly at the incident. Never mind, just, you know, pay it myself, I guess. I'm done with all of it. So I went to Gloucestershire and it was like night and day. Oh, yes. Such a high-trust society. It's the sort of place you can imagine leaving your front door open. The streets were pristine. There was no weird men loitering around. I mean, it was just like Nirvana. And then you come back to London. It's when you see the two different contexts in stark relief that you realise quite how far our big cities and some of our post-industrial towns have fallen. It is terrifying. Georgina, thank you so much for calling. Always love hearing from you. Let's squeeze in Jacqueline, who's in Dorset. Good morning, Jacqueline.
Oh, good morning, Alex. Such a pleasure to be talking to you. I so admire you.
Oh,
yeah, I just pulled off in my car, just pulled to the side. And I just equally wanted to add to what you just said about Gloucestershire. Beautiful. But do you know what it is? Sadly, Alex, it is spreading out to the counties. We see it here. We live in the New Forest, and sad to say, like you just said, low-level crime, litter along our A roads are utterly disgusting, and we've seen that really.
Yeah, oh, we've lost Jacqueline there from the New Forest. She's gone completely. We're not having much luck with the phone lines today. But interesting, talking about the New Forest, there have been all sorts of peculiar incidents like hair coursing, you know, these sort of old-fashioned crimes taking place. And I wonder how many of those are at the hands of foreign gangs as well. But, you know, I tell you this, it is so true that when you look at someone, if you don't live in one of those towns or cities that has been absolutely blighted by extremely high levels of migration, especially from young men from stridently different cultures to our own. If you do happen to knock about in the leafy Cotswolds where life hasn't changed for the past 200 years, you'd be forgiven for thinking that Britain is absolutely fine, that everybody else worrying about migration or rioting against a particular incident are facing some sort of, you know, mad, made-up existential crisis. Well, it isn't made up. It's not a fantasy. Like I said, you just have to walk in certain parts of London and look around and you suddenly realise quite what's happened. Quite what has happened to our capital city that our ancestors built. Our beautiful buildings, those Georgian, Edwardian and Victorian streets, the beautiful edifices that were once glorious townhouses and hotels that now look like squats for Lord knows who from Lord knows where. You have to ask yourself when you walk down streets of London that once were busy commercial streets full of independent businesses, through places to go buy your groceries, the butchers, the bakers, the hardware store, the clothing store, that now are just entirely filled with foreign supermarkets, vape shops and Turkish barbers. You just have to ask yourself as you walk down the streets of London, busy, jam-packed, stinking, smelly, dirty, violent, with people stealing watches, mobile phones, constantly targeting women walking by themselves. Men can't even go to Mayfair wearing anything but a plastic Casio these days, knowing that some sort of foreign gang are going to come after them. You have to be on that tube and see the men squeezing up against you at rush hour and leering at you. And then you realise quite how far we've fallen and how disgusting it is that we have handed over our capital city, the once brilliant, glorious, beautiful centre of the world, London. Yes, a multicultural, multiracial city that rubbed along brilliantly, thank you very much. And when you look at its rapid decline now, what a tragedy it is. And the people that are responsible, they should never be forgotten. I'm taking a short break now. I think I'm going to need one, but don't go anywhere because I'm back for another hour just after this. I'll see you on the other side.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This
Well, hello, welcome back. The big news of today is the ongoing retaliation of Iran against Israel, and that's an ongoing operation of Israel against Iran. It's all kicking off over there in the Middle East. We know that Israel overnight in the early hours of this morning targeted 200 Israeli Air Force jets took part in strikes on Iran, targeting nuclear facilities, taking out the head of the Iranian armed forces, General Mohammad Bagheri, Iran's chief of the military staff. He was killed alongside top commanders, as well as 6 nuclear scientists, using more than 330 munitions. Well, Iran has responded, thus far launching 100 drones in Israel's direction. All of them, I think, have now been shot down and intercepted. But Iran has declared that this is now war. Meanwhile, Israel has said that this is just the beginning, that they plan to continue these operations, and that Iran could have built 50 nuclear bombs within days. The UK being lily-livered, not saying it's going to come to Israel's defence if things get worse, if Iran does seem to muster the kinetic force to respond in a way that should threaten Israel's capability of defending itself. Meanwhile, America saying that they will go to their allies' aid in the Middle East, and Donald Trump writing on Truth Social that Iran needs to get back to the table and come to a deal on uranium proliferation on Sunday. Let's speak now to Cameron Khan-Sarinia, who is the Vice President of the National Union for Democracy in Iran. I mean, it seems to me, Cameron, that Iran have been very much weakened, that Israel have probably picked the timing of this operation quite critically, knowing that Iranian proxies have been diminished, knowing that they are down on their weaponry and their arms, knowing that Iran was potentially drawing out these talks on a nuclear deal with America in order to buy time, suggesting that Iran was very close to developing nuclear warheads, that this could have happened within a matter of days, and taking the opportunity, I would imagine, to get in there and strike at the heart of the regime's operations to develop nuclear weapons while they could. But how do you think now Iran's going to respond? Could this be a tipping point now, an inflection point, where somehow the public of Iran, who are fed up with the regime, manage to topple it?
Well, thank you very much for having me on the program. And you're exactly right. I mean, first of all, let's call a spade a spade. This is a humiliating defeat for Ali Khamenei, the 30-plus year dictator of Iran. It's not just that the individuals who were eliminated in yesterday's strike by the Israelis were senior Islamic Republic officials. These are very close personal confidants of the supreme leader. Hajizadeh, the head of the regime's air force, Bagheri, who you mentioned, the head of the armed forces, Salami, the head of Khamenei's prized IRGC, really his Praetorian Guard, have all been eliminated. And these individuals do not rise through the ranks of the Islamic Republic's armed forces because they are supreme strategists or military commanders. They rise through the ranks because they are loyal to the regime, and they're personally loyal to Ali Khamenei. And the fact that they were eliminated in the evening, in their homes, in their beds, perhaps, has got to be a huge psychological shock to Ali Khamenei. He himself must be incredibly fearful, incredibly afraid at this very moment, and I imagine incredibly humiliated. And therefore, it's likely that the response will be significant. This first volley of, say, 100 drones that the regime sent to Israel probably will not be the end. His statement was very strong against the Israeli attack, indicating that further responses are coming. But you put your finger right on it with your question about the Iranian people. The Iranian people are often ignored in these conversations, and they are fed up. They're sick and tired of the Islamic Republic. They don't view what happened yesterday as some sort of foreign invasion. They view it as a likely justified retaliation for 46 years of terrorism and chaos and destruction that their really occupying forces of the Islamic Republic have forced on the entire Middle East. And so it's entirely possible that in the coming weeks, as the regime is weaker than it ever has been in history, we see the Iranian people look to take opportunities to take back their country from this regime.
I mean, Khamenei is old, he's isolated, he's extremely out of step with the Iranian public, and yet he seems to have proven to be a pretty hard man to dislodge, given that there has been public uprising in Iran against the regime, particularly from women. One assumes, of course, he is a viable target for Israel to try and strike, but necessary precautions, no doubt, are now being taken by him and his coterie following the fatalities of so many of his allies. How realistic is it that actually the regime in Iran can be toppled, and how realistic is it that it would be replaced by something which the West could recognise as a democratic ally?
I think the likelihood of both of those are very significant. Iran, we don't have to look really into the future or into some sort of seeing eyeglass to see what the future might hold. Iran had very cordial, very productive relations with the West, with the United Kingdom, with Europe, with the United States, and with countries in the Middle East, both Israel and Arab, prior to the Islamic Revolution. Under the Pahlavi dynasty, Iran was a great friend to the West, and the West was a good friend to Iran, but Iran was also able to balance its relations with Eastern powers like Russia and China, and was really a source for stability in the region. And that's why so many Iranians are fed up with this regime. It's not just that they're dissatisfied with the incompetence, with the corruption, with the devastation, with the repression. It's that they can so clearly see what they want their future to be just by looking into their own recent past history. And that's why so many Iranians on the streets across the country in weeks and months past have chanted the name of Reza Pahlavi, the exiled crown prince, thinking that those were better days and they can once again have a secular, democratic country that can be at peace with its neighbors, that can be at peace with the world, as opposed to spending billions of dollars on terrorism, on destruction, on devastation, on sowing chaos. Those could be built on building schools, on building roads, on building water irrigation facilities. Iran faces a myriad crises that those billions of dollars of this wealthy country's resources could be spent on solving. And so that's why, because of the dissatisfaction of the people, that this regime is so weak. And I think that if foreign governments, you asked the question, Ali Khamenei has been difficult to dislodge. Part of that reason has been because Western policy, British policy, French policy, American policy, has been so focused on dealing with the Islamic Republic as opposed to dealing with an alternative. And if every time the regime faces a crisis, Western policy is to seek to, tamper down tensions or to find some diplomatic route, that's not going to solve the problem. Nearly half a century has proven that this regime does not want to solve the problems. It is the one causing the problems. And so the way that we can find a lasting solution is by looking for other alternatives. And now is really an inflection point for Western policy on Iran. It's time to look for other solutions, other alternatives, and a fundamental wholesale change of Iran policy that would go beyond this regime. First of all, there will be very few members of the regime left to negotiate with. They're being eliminated, it seems, one by one. And so it's time for folks in Downing Street, in Élysée, and in the White House, and others to look for new partners, to look for new solutions to the Iran problem. And I truly believe that the facts bear out, and the people of Iran on the ground seek a future which would be fundamentally different from the Iran that the world has come to know for the past 46 years. Solving the Iran problem would really solve the world's problems as well.
Oh, without a doubt it would, and it'd be lovely to have the sort of values of the former Persian Empire back front and centre again. I mean, is this the case that actually the Ayatollah is pretty old now? I don't know what his health is like, but certainly I can't imagine he's got many years left on the clock, and that this potentially is a waiting game, that if anything happened to him, if he were to meet his demise, then that would be the moment in which the forces that be can seek their opportunity to perhaps return the ancestors of the Shah into power. And has the West essentially, I'm getting from what you were saying, that you think the West has been very weak by trying to essentially negotiate with terrorists who do not have any intention whatsoever of upholding their end of any sort of deal.
That's entirely true. Western policy has really been focused on this fantastical notion of behavior change from this regime, where really the solution is a change of this regime itself, and not a change at the hand of Western barrels of guns or troops or ground invasions. There are millions of boots on the ground in Iran right now, and those are the boots of the Iranian people. They have risen up time and time again. They have sacrificed their own lives. Thousands have been murdered by this brutal dictatorship. The Iranian people are not sitting on the sidelines waiting for a handout, asking Sir Keir or asking President Macron or President Trump to deliver them a free country on a silver platter. They're fighting for it. They're dying for it. Young children, young women, young men are risking their lives for it. And so they're absolutely seeking to take their country back. And when they see that in the face of their sacrifice, the response from the leaders of the democratic world who claim to stand for human rights and democracy is instead to cut deals with a brutal dictatorship that has slaughtered people by the tens of thousands in its 46-year rule, that exports terror as its #1 export across the world, that is the #1 world state sponsor of terrorism, that has not just as a slogan, but as a policy, death to Israel, death to America, death to Great Britain. When they see that, they sniff hypocrisy in the air. And so it is time for a wholesale change. And as to what the future of Iran might look like, that will be determined by the Iranian people. As we have seen, there are chants across the country for the exiled crown prince, for the Pahlavi dynasty. But what's quite unique in this moment is that you have a person like the crown prince, who is really a leader for millions of people inside the country, whose response is not to say that, yes, it will be me, I will do it alone. It is to say that I'm here to lead this transition to secular democracy, to be a bridge to a brighter future, and the destination of that future will be determined by the Iranian people in free and fair elections and in a nationwide referendum. So we're not here to predetermine any outcomes. We're here to help the Iranian people to determine their own destiny, the outcome of which they will establish at the ballot box.
Cameron, thank you ever so much. That's Cameron Khan-Serenier, Vice President of the National Union for Democracy in Iran. It'd be nice to get democracy back in Iran. And he's absolutely right, you know. If you could deal with a problem like Iran, the biggest global sponsor of terrorism, the people who are also sending weaponry over to Russia and prolonging that brutal war of attrition in Ukraine, the people funding all of these terrorist enterprises, from the Houthis to Hezbollah to Hamas, if you could deal with a problem like Iran, where most of the people in Iran are good, honest people who don't want to live under this regime, who don't support the regime's attitudes towards the West or towards Jews, who want to see women free to feel the wind in their hair and the sun on their skin, who want to be able to vote, who want to have an education, who want to be able to trade internationally and not be subject to the sanctions because they're run by a bearded nut job in his 80s. If you could solve that problem, believe me, you would solve a lot of the problems around the world. So all power to your elbow is what I personally say when it comes to Israel. Steve doesn't agree. He says, disgusted with your pro-Zionist publicity. Same BS as Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. He says, P.S. I do not support Islamists either. Look, I'm sorry, but it's not about same as Iraqi weapons of mass destruction, Steve. It's very clear to see what Iran does and who they're funding and who they're training and who they're backing and what happens as a result of that. We've had 3 Iranian nationals in court in the United Kingdom because they were planning a bomb attack. We know that it's regimes such as Iran and their proxies that all begin with a letter H who are probably making billions of dollars from trafficking people. Another reason why we need to start turning boats around. It's not just about saving lives at sea. It's about who are the people who are making the money from this illicit, awful exercise. And quite what are they using that money to spend on? What I'd imagine they're arming some of their Islamist entities. So we do need to deal with Iran. And like I said, I'm glad that Israel is taking strident measures and getting in there first. I'm disgusted at the United Kingdom, as per usual, being lily-livered. And let's just see how this plays out, because it seems to me that Iran have been caught napping. They're on the back foot. I don't think they have any particular response in their arsenal. And I would imagine if they did, Israel would have known about it. Some of the best intelligence in the world. So let's see how this unravels over the next few days, indeed weeks, and let's see if it might actually see the downfall of the regime over in Tehran, which would be a saving grace for the entire international community. Now, some pretty appalling news that has just come in. We're going to be discussing it after the break, but 7 men have been convicted of the sexual exploitation of 2 teenage girls in Rochdale, and they're the usual suspects. We're going to be talking about that after this.
this runway that the plane took off from may be rather too short. Is that a possible explanation for what went wrong here?
Indeed. I tracked the ground radar information, which has not yet been confirmed by the Indian authorities, and clearly shows the aircraft entering the runway at an intersection and initiating its takeoff roll right from there instead of backtracking.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is...
Well, hello, welcome back, but not welcome news I have for you now. 7 Asian men have been convicted of the sexual exploitation of 2 white teenage schoolgirls in Rochdale. It's a pattern that is all too familiar in this country. The defendants preyed on the vulnerabilities of the victims to groom them as sex slaves from the age of 13 on various dates in the greater Manchester town between 2001 and 2006. Both girls had deeply troubled home lives and were given drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, places to stay and people to be with. Soon after, they were expected to have sex whenever and wherever the defendants and other men wanted, in filthy flats, on rancid mattresses, in cars, car parks, alleyways and disused warehouses. The jurors deliberated for 3 weeks before delivering their unanimous guilty verdicts on Friday. Well, let's speak now to former Met Police Detective DCI Mike Neville. Mike, good to have you on the programme again. I mean, these might be historic crimes taking place 20 years ago, but you wonder why it takes so long for these things to come in courts and people to be convicted. But it's the same old pattern, isn't it? The same old, no doubt, concerns that there were cover-ups, that perhaps social services didn't do what they needed to do to make sure these vulnerable girls were protected. Another reason for the British public to be deeply concerned about some of the things taking place in its towns and cities, particularly in the north of the country.
It is horrendous, and these are ruined lives, aren't they? These are girls whose lives have been ruined over this time, and the authorities, both I think the DC is Maggie Oliver, who's exposed all this in Greater Manchester Police, the cover-ups by the police and the social services, people who were too frightened of racism to deal with young girls who have been exploited. And one thing I would highlight, even on your headline, it says 7 Asian men. Well, they're certainly not Hindus or Sikhs or people who are Buddhist. These are Pakistani Muslim men from a certain area of rural Pakistan who feel that they can treat white girls in this wicked and evil way. And just by saying they're Asian, it sort of covers up the truth, and we've got to be absolutely honest about who these people are, and their communities as well have got to start rejecting them. If you get convicted of these vile offences in most other communities, you'd be extradited, you'd be out, you'd be finished. But not there. They'll do these prison sentences and go back, and that's simply not good enough.
I've got a question for you, Mike, because we've heard about the grooming gangs in Rotherham, in Rochdale, in parts of Birmingham, even in Oxfordshire, for crying out loud. And yet, I don't ever seem to hear of similar atrocities taking place in London, and yet London is the most multicultural of all of the cities, being our capital. When you were a police detective for the Met, were you aware of similar things, the exploitation of young girls by foreign-born Muslim men taking place in the capital?
Well, my operational experience, I was a sort of a young officer and then a detective sergeant, a detective inspector in places like Brixton, where there was no, and Lambeth and Southwark, where there was no real big Muslim communities. But I'd be very, very surprised. You know, a lot of these communities are settled in sort of West London in particular. If there wasn't things going on, how can it not be happening? This is the tragedy of these things. If it's happening in, as you say, places like Oxford and Telford, which seem to be, you know, away from these standard northern places, I'm sure it must be happening in London. And wherever it's happening, it needs to be whittled out. It needs to be sorted out. The men involved need to be sent to prison, and these girls need to have the best treatment they can have, because their lives as I say, have been utterly ruined by this wickedness.
What do you make of what's going on in Northern Ireland at the moment? I mean, the sort of conflagration there, the rioting in Ballymena is pretty severe. It makes Southport look like a walk in the park, quite frankly. But my fear is this, Mike, that this is not going to go anywhere soon. I think that the deterrent that was slammed onto the public in England after the Southport riots with the court cases of people like Lucy Connolly being sent to prison, that bung will hold for only so long. And that because we're not going to see a change of fortunes, because we're going to keep getting stories like this, another tragic tale of men from a foreign background treating young white girls as sex slaves. The details are harrowing. This isn't going to go anywhere. We're still going to have waves of mass migration coming into this country, illegals coming over by boat or in the backs of lorries. We're going to have more and more incidents where we see clash of cultures taking place, and that the public are not going to sit on their hands for much longer. That's my concern, Mike.
Absolutely. I mean, there's going to be no excuse for throwing firebombs and rocks and whatever else at officers. Those officers are just like I was. They're doing their job over in Ulster, trying to keep the peace. The problem here lies with the politicians who allow this to happen. And once they've allowed it to happen, they then cover up and start just calling people names when they say there's a problem. I was just watching the other day the Gillian Duffy thing with Gordon Brown, where he called her a bigoted woman when he got back in the car. That is the establishment's attitude to anybody who says, look, the fact that suddenly in Ballymena a whole street is taken over by people of a completely different culture. That's the attitude of politicians, and this covering up, calling people names, far right and whatever else, smearing them, is not going to work. There's a real massive problem here. The Prime Minister's now backtracking on his statement that we're becoming an island of strangers. He wants to go to my own hometown of Bolton. It's already an island of strangers where several communities live in one place and one particular community live in another, and the two never meet. The other thing about Northern Ireland, of course, is I was a soldier, I was in the military police in Northern Ireland, is that these are places where the paramilitaries have a lot of control. These are not like the Southport riots. When the Prime Minister talked about them being organised, which we know wasn't true, they were just locals. The people in Ulster, they're rioting and things like this is something that's happened. It's a powder keg. And so it's far more organised. And you've got people there who are very, very good at sort of attacking the police, and that's not good for them at all. So the politicians have to sort this out. They need to start being honest, because people are seeing these boats come across and they're thinking, why isn't anything done about it? They see their communities being completely taken over, and then crimes committed, and the police being more concerned with the criminals than the victims. It isn't good enough, and as I say, the politicians and the establishment share the blame here.
Are you surprised and alarmed at the speed within which this sort of social disintegration is taking place? Because certainly when I sort of came back to broadcasting about 4 years ago, I wasn't talking about riots in the UK. I didn't predict them happening. Yes, I knew we had a migration problem. I knew there was a small boats problem. But I didn't foresee so many of our streets, and not just our streets, but streets across Europe, being taken over by masked marauding gangs and a local population who are fed up every time there's yet another incident of terrorism or a sexual assault on a young girl at the hands of a migrant male. Does it surprise you to see quite how quickly the unravelling's happened? And what do you think of the UK's future in respect to this?
I don't think it's just UK. It's the whole of Europe. I was over in Cologne to help the police with the sex attacks when they happened in 2015, and I noticed there in Germany how things were unravelling. Litter on the floor. I'd never seen that in Germany before, and it's got worse and worse. And as you say over here, people just see lawlessness. People just walking into a shop. They don't even conceal things they're stealing. They just put them in a bag and walk out with them. They see people just travelling on the tube without paying. They see people abusing the police. They see is criminals. There's no consequences to their actions. They see themselves being let out of prison unless you send offensive tweets, of course, and then you're kept in. And I think what happens with this unravelling, as you say, is it just gets quicker and quicker because society starts to break down. When obeying the rules becomes the most stupid option, that's when society falls apart, because most of us really want to live together, obey the rules. But when you just see time and time again that people just take advantage of the situation, they come in on the small boat, they can steal, rob, and whatever else, anybody, and that's the locals as well. It isn't good.
No.
And it just sends a terrible message that lawlessness wins every time.
I mean, I want you mentioned you went over to help the German police in the wake of the Cologne sex attacks. I want you to remind our audience who might not be familiar with what happened 10 years ago, quite what did occur. It was New Year's Eve, wasn't it? And my understanding is there were over 1,000 incidents of girls in the main square celebrating New Year's Eve being sexually assaulted or even raped by gangs of foreign-born men.
That's right. So they were allegedly asylum seekers from Syria, but real people didn't know where they were from. I went to assist the German police, and what happened was, for 3 days, a lot of the ladies had videoed these things. There isn't many surveillance cameras in Germany for sort of historical and reasons. There is now, of course. But they videoed all these incidents, but the authorities tried to suppress it for 3 days before the truth came out. And it just follows the same pattern that we get across the West. That a wicked incident happens involving like Rudabagana over in Rudabagana in Southport, and the authorities try to conceal it. I've been trying to ask, for example, when did the Prime Minister know? I sent a Freedom of Information Act request. When did the Prime Minister know that there was an Al-Qaeda handbook and ricin found in his house? They will not tell me that. Why not? Why won't they tell me the truth of that? And what we see all the time is that, you know, it's a mentally ill Norwegian. It's 2 years since remember the Nottingham, the dreadful murders of 3 in Nottingham. Again, the authorities try to conceal what's really happened. And what people are seeing now, of course, in Liverpool, when it was a white guy who was driving that car, which was involved in all sorts of accidents and people being hurt.
Oh, we know every detail within 2 seconds then when the perpetrator's white.
So it's just what people feel, I think. I think people are getting more and more cynical about the establishment. The establishment and politicians are becoming more and more detached from reality, and it's really, really bad. And you see in Germany and places like that, their reaction to this. I was watching a video for Alternative for Deutschland, the AfD, the German party there. The authorities are there trying to ban them. That's not the way forward. Silencing people, shutting them up, calling them names is not the solution. There's real big issues in this country with uncontrolled immigration and the amount of crime, which the authorities now admit. They'll call me racist. They can call every racist. To publish the figures now, saying some communities commit 20 times the amount of crime that the average person does. That's simply not good enough, and people can see this with their own eyes. And if they keep seeing it, they're going to get more and more angry.
You can't gaslight people when they've got their peepers, that's for sure. Mike Neville, thank you ever so much. It's a sorry state of affairs. Brad in Cambridge just says, hi Alex, I'm a born and bred London. I absolutely loathe the place now. Moving out was the best thing I did. I'm telling you, I cannot wait, because I honestly think within the next number of years, and I don't know how quickly it's going to come, but the lawlessness that we're seeing at the moment in Ballymena will at some point spread to London. It's going to happen. When it does, there will be looting. There will be buildings being set on fire. It will make the previous riots that we had about 10 years ago look like child's play. I don't want to be in London when that happens. I think it's almost inevitable. I say that with a heavy heart. I don't want it to be. I'd love to carry on living in London. Love to be able to afford to pay the rents because, I don't know, 90% of the housing stock is occupied by people born in a different country or owned by people using it to launder their filthy money. I'd love to be able to walk down the street and feel safe. I'd love to call this capital city my home. But it's not my home. It was once upon a time, but it's been taken off me. It's been handed over to people who don't even like it, who don't respect it, who use it like a playground, dump their rubbish in it, do whatever they want, who come over here for the express purpose of just committing crime, whether it's stealing phones, mugging people for watches, looting the cooperative so you can run out with a steak or two to sell at the back door of a takeaway shop, or worse still, give to a gang who's going to import it over the channel into restaurants in the Balkans. I'm fed up, actually, with the fact that London has been handed over not just to people not born and bred in this country, but to people who want to exploit this country for their criminal purposes. It's disgusting. It's gone. It's gone. I go out there onto the street, I leave my home, walk to the tube station, I look around me, I don't recognise a single voice I hear. Not one language is one that I'm familiar with. Not one cuisine is one that I think, oh yeah, I was brought up eating that. None of it. No, I don't mind diversity. I'm the first person, having lived in multiple countries around the world, to welcome people from other corners of the globe, as long as they want to be here because they want to be British and they want to subscribe to our way of life. Not people who mean us harm, who are going to trash the place with their litter and filthy habits, who are going to burglarise our high streets and harass our young women. Forget it. That should never have happened. Generations, 2,000 years of people building up this nation to one of the greatest on earth. And like that, in the flick of a pen, our political leaders have just handed it over to our enemies. It makes me sick to the back teeth. We're going to take a short break now, but when I come back, don't you worry, that level of anger is going to be heightened even more, because I'm going to be joined by former television husband, Mr. Kevin O'Sullivan.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello there and welcome to the show. Mr. Kevin O'Sullivan, of course, the wonderful presenter of the Political Asylum. He used to be my on-screen television husband back when we had those fancy studios downstairs and I didn't have to sit in here all by myself for 3 hours. Kev, thank you so much for your company. I'm going to start with this story because this has just come in. 7 men convicted of the sexual exploitation of 2 teenage girls in Rochdale. Guess what? 7 Asian men, the usual suspects. I mean, these incidents took place between 2001 and 2006. One wonders why it's taken so long to get to court. But these poor young girls from the age of 13 from troubled backgrounds were groomed, forced to have sex with a number of men in filthy flats, on rancid mattresses, in cars, car parks, alleyways and disused warehouses. They were treated like animals. Yet again, another story showing quite the crisis that we're in.
Yeah, and everybody knows that this is still going on. That, if you like, is a kind of historical conviction dating back. But these grooming gangs, rape gangs, let's call them what they are still operating all over the country. Ask any police officer, ask any social worker, ask most local politicians. They know this is still going on. And if you look at what's happening in Ballymena, this is the basis of a building social unrest. The sexual crimes by migrants, men of foreign origin, these are probably the culprits in this case, will, of course, be Muslim men of Pakistani origin. So the committing of sex crimes by foreign migrants who came here is causing the kind of social unrest that is getting extremely worrying. As you said to me last night, Alex, this country, in terms of this, could be on the edge of a precipice.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. When you look at the pattern of the uprisings that are taking place around Western Europe now, Southport, again, that was rioting in the UK. Ballymena might be Northern Ireland, but that is the United Kingdom. Clearly, what happened with those televised trials wasn't enough to deter or suppress the would-be rioters over in Ballymena. And you have to wonder, one more story like this that comes out, and whether or not the blue touch paper will be lit again in the United Kingdom. And then if that happens, how many Brits, having seen what happened last time, just throw caution to the wind and say, I don't care anymore. They're not listening. They're not doing anything. They're gaslighting us. They're lying to us. They're prejudicing our own trials and throwing people in prison as political prisoners. That the UK public by this point are extremely desperate, because the one thing the government doesn't seem to do is listen to them and deal with their concerns. We've now got idiot Rachel Reeves saying she's got no clue where these migrants are going to go when she shuts down all the hotels as promised, if she does shut down hotels as promised. Reports in Guido Fawkes suggesting the government were just going to buy hotels. You couldn't make it up. The government's, of course, refuting that. But I think, and I want to know what you think, when these young men are moved out of hotels, which is bad enough, it costs the taxpayer an arm and a leg, but instead are put into housing, probably in poor neighbourhoods, with nothing much to do, 5 young men twiddling their fingers day in, day out, I don't reckon they're going to be taking university degrees. These people are ripe for being plucked off to be used in the black market. These are young men with their own urges, coming from cultures where women are normally dressed like ghosts, can't even show their ankles, and then they come to the land of Bonnie Blue and it's a toxic cocktail. I have a feeling Rachel Reeves not knowing where these channel migrants are going to go instead of hotels means they're going to go into the heart of the community, and it's going to make matters worse.
Well, exactly. I'm tempted to say what she said. I couldn't agree with more with everything you just said. Now, in terms of these asylum seeker hotels, this absurd statement by Rachel Reeves in her equally absurd spending review, which is going to cost us all a fortune in tax rises if they bring anything about, because this is the government of announcements. You know, they think an announcement is a fact. Well, it's not. Now, she says that she's going to clear out the asylum seeker hotels by the end of this parliament, in other words, within 4 years, which seems to me to be a very, very feeble ambition in itself. Now, 2 things to bear in mind here. A, they will not achieve this. They will not get the asylum seekers out of all the hotels. Bearing in mind, we've got about 40,000 right now in more than 200 hotels all over the country. Secondly, even if they come halfway close to achieving this ambition, where are they going to put them? Now, Jeremy Kyle asked James Murray, one of Rachel Reeves's deputies, Labour MP, the other day, well, where are you going to put them? 9 times, he asked him. He had no idea. Rachel Reeves, yesterday on Times Radio, literally admitted she had no idea. She literally said, I don't know. When asked, she said, well, that's not my job. That's the Home Office's job. So in other words, she's putting the blame, if you like, or the impetus on her sworn enemy, the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. Those 2 women do not get on. So what Rachel Reeves is saying is we're going to clear out all the hotels. Well, where are you going to put them?
Yeah.
Well, she went like this. Well, it's not my job to accommodate them. That's the Home Office.
I mean, I know hotels cost a lot of money, but I think moving multiple young men into residences, you know, and in privately rented properties down ordinary streets is even worse.
You say privately rented, that would be better than what actually will be the case. They'll be put into social housing, into council houses. They will be put, these illegal foreigners who broke into our country unlawfully, will be put into council houses, into social houses, leaping to the top of the queue over British citizens who've been waiting for years for these houses.
Yeah.
That is what's going on in this country. And Labour's incoherence on asylum seeker hotels is beyond belief. And you talk about Guido Fawkes reporting that, in fact, right now, the government is busy buying hotels in which to carry on accommodating asylum seekers. What are they going to do? They're going to rename them normal migrant centres. In other words, seriously. In other words, they are going to solve the migrant crisis with wordplay. The Home Office is denying this, so you know for damn sure it's true.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is they're going to be putting these young migrant men, like you said, into the most affordable housing, which is in the poorest communities, where you are going to find the most vulnerable young girls. Yet again, you're going to have men coming from wildly different cultures, from far-flung countries, who have a very different idea of how women should behave, being put right into the exact neighbourhoods where you've got young, persuadable girls with potentially disruptive home lives, and then you know what happens. Grooming gangs, victims. And, you know I might sound like a modern-day Mary Whitehouse, but I say with all sincerity that these men come from countries where women have to dress up as ghosts, and meanwhile in the United Kingdom everything seems like hypersexualization on steroids. And I hate to sound like an old fuddy-duddy, but I'm not the only one. I mean, looking at the new album cover of Sabrina Carpenter, barely heard of her, wouldn't recognise her if she was in my local chippy, but there you go. I mean, come on. What is that? I'm sorry, but I don't find this stuff funny. This isn't women's lib. This isn't take care of your own bodies, be the agent of your own destiny. This is allow yourself to be degraded, have no pride in yourself, have no sense of sorority, and promote to young girls that this is fashionable, this is powerful, this is desirable. And do you know what? Want to dress like that? Act like that? Put out publicity like that? What happens is the number of rapes go up, particularly from men from other countries who, quite frankly, would look at that image and judge women like me who have blonde hair in a particular way. I'm fed up with this. I'm sorry, but I actually want to bring back the watershed, the stiff upper lip, regulate what sort of pornography is available online. And when it comes to pictures like that in HMV, the CD would have the parental guidance warning or some sort of censorship on it, turn round to that artist and say, pack it in.
Yeah, this album's called Man's Best Friend. It's just Sabrina Carpenter doing more of what she does, working on that well-known, unfortunately successful principle that sex sells. There's something quite disturbing about the holding of the hair and her completely subordinate position here. But it's not much worse than what she's always done, and she's not the only one who does it. In the world of pop, women debase themselves, men debase women in order to sell records. It's as simple as that. I mean, it is pretty disgusting.
But it's got so bad, though, Kev, hasn't it? Because, you've been around a lot longer than me. You're as old as Methuselah. But back in the day... Older. Older than Methuselah. But back in the day when you were a teenager with raging hormones, what did you listen to? The Doobie Brothers? Or Pan's People was probably about as exciting and edgy as it got. The problem with this stuff is with every single passing year, it gets more and more explicit, it gets more and more degrading, it gets more and more normalised.
Well, let's not go back to my teenage years. It was a lot worse than the Doobie Brothers and Pan's People, I can assure you of that. But yeah, this is the sexualisation of the younger generation. And of course, Sabrina Carpenter aims her albums, her records at very young girls. And that is a disturbing principle. To go back to what you were saying, what we were saying about grooming gangs, those riots in Ballymena, in fact, and the migrant crisis, the asylum seeker hotels. What is the real or what makes these problems even worse? It is our body politic, our government, our politicians who are doing exactly what they did when the grooming gang scandal was unfolding. They are turning their backs. They're not addressing this honestly. They're pretending it's not happening because they fear they could be accused of Islamophobia. And they are gaslighting us about what's going on in Ballymena, saying it's just thugs, mindless thugs. It's not. I mean, yes, the thuggery is off the scale. The riots and the violence and the petrol bombs, of course, we condemn, are not to be condoned. But don't say there's no reason for it. The reason for it is that two young migrants, 14-year-old Romanian boys, have been charged with the oral rape of a local girl. There are shades of Southport there where everyone said, pick Keir Starmer, they're just far-right thugs, these aren't protests. Well, you know, the riots, again, were abominable. But the point is, it wasn't, those riots were not without reason. The rioters thought that the perpetrator of that awful crime in the dance hall, that awful slaughter, was a migrant. Turns out they were only slightly wrong. It was the son of a migrant. And our government pretended it was just mindless violence. They've got to address it, just like they pretend. Last night, listen to this, you'll love this. A guy called Darren Jones, who's the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Labour MP, said, I'm going to do this on my show tonight, said on Question Time, the majority of people in these boats are children, babies, and women. That's just a lie. That is just a lie. It's just a lie.
Why do they gaslight us, Kev?
Lying to us.
Why are they doing it? I mean, I tell you why they're doing it. They know they've wrecked our country. They screwed it up so badly in a way that's barely reversible unless you take out some pretty strident policies, the likes of which would have Sir Keir Starmer wetting himself because they'd contravene international law. And so they've got no other answer to the growing problem other than trying to oppress the public itself. It's disgusting. Kev, thank you ever so much. It's always so good catching up with you. Right, we're going to take a short break now, and after that, it's your opportunity to have a chit-chat with me. 03444991000 is the number to dial. Normal network rate 8722 on the text. Put talk before you send your message, and I'll see you on the other side of these commercials.
Where is the money coming from, and can we afford it? And where the money is coming from are these eye-watering taxes that this government is dishing out left, right and centre that has been killing growth, strangling businesses. We've seen a government that through destroying growth, through stoking inflation, getting interest rates higher than they would otherwise be, adding to this huge mound of national debt, the servicing costs on which incidentally are 100 billion a year in interest alone. That's twice what we spend on defence. You're really seeing a government that's losing control of the public finances.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there. Right, let's squeeze in some of your calls now. This is Andrew in Hertfordshire. Good afternoon to you, Andrew.
Good afternoon. Crackerjack for the show. I do feel the genuine emotion in your voice in relation to London. I walked around it yesterday. I get it. It's just foul. In relation to the riots in Northern Ireland, it's very straightforward. There is a catalyst in London, which is the Notting Hill Carnival. And it only takes an event that is of that size, 1 million people with 5,000 police officers, which is totally unticketed, for the place to explode. And if you get 5 seats of disorder in the country shuts down because there isn't the resources to deal with it. And if you look at the budget that we just listened to, if Keir Starmer had led on things to stop the votes and to actually bring this under control, it would have been a success. But he didn't read the room. All the stuff he talks about was rubbish. It's irrelevant. Once they tax jobs, the economy's finished for 4 years. And they failed to look at the elephant in the room. Everything goes back to the fact we have 10 million, 2 million people in this country, and all of our services are beyond breaking point. And you're very interesting in that you said something which I thought was amazing. You can't walk around in London. And that means that actually there is the ultimate breakdown. We've lost control of the country.
We've lost control of our streets. And any society that is prepared to throw the safety, security and integrity of women and girls under a bus is a failed society as far as I'm concerned. It's interesting. You talk about, taxation being at the root of this as well. I put it down to energy costs, actually. We've got the highest energy costs in the world. Now, imagine if you didn't have Mad Ed playing his ukulele in the middle of fields, celebrating the fact he's putting a load of farmers out of business and, sending a wrecking ball through the middle of food security just so he can report wigwams and solar panels from slave labour encampments in China. We might actually be able to, pay our electricity bills, which would bring down the cost of living, which would bring down the cost of our public services, because guess what? Hospitals have to pay those bills as well. It would help our public services. It would help with employment because businesses could afford to employ more people. Therefore, it breaks the argument of needing to bring in cheap migrant labour because that's more affordable than having to pay the minimum wage with the increase of national insurance on top of that. And so if you actually look at the heart of all of this, you need to bring down energy bills and for once and for all, actually properly put a cap on the number of people coming into this country. Problem is with this useless, feckless, spineless, ideologically mad communist-driven government is they're not going to do either of those things. So how we get ourselves out of this hole and how we begin to piece back an unbroken society, I really don't know. But it's going to take a blimmin' long time. Andrew in Hertfordshire, thank you ever so much. I'm going to go now to Mr. Ian Collins because he's just come in. Well, do you not find it really... I'll tell you what it is, Ian. I remember during the Southport riot, so I was in here presenting, and it was a very febrile atmosphere. It was a very strange period of time in which to sit for 3 hours in this booth and sort of freestyle on the topic when people were being persecuted for the things they'd written online. But I never really thought that the disintegration would happen as quickly as it is. You see what's going on in Ballymena. You look, this is happening across Europe, Ian. Yeah. And I don't know how... it's not going to be, oh, well, that riot's done. Oh, let's go back. This is normal now. This is the new normal. The trouble is, somebody, because we touched on it yesterday, and we're going to start with it as well this afternoon, because I'm genuinely fascinated what happens here. Doesn't help, and I'm sure you've just been talking about this. I didn't get a chance to hear when the police chief comes out and goes, oh, you're all racists and bigots, etc. Yeah. Now, obviously, there are some racists and bigots. Nobody disputes that. Setting fire to a house or throwing a stone or a rock at somebody's head, whether a copper or an individual, that's not good either. No. But it also spectacularly misses the point of the debate if you only focus on that, because, of course, there is a wider issue here. People are unhappy. There's some real anger out there, and politicians... Look what Starmer did. Starmer did exactly what that cop's just done in Northern Ireland, come straight out with it. It's just a race riot, so nothing to see here, nothing to talk about. Oh, yeah, there one wants this all thugs on their side. Well, really? You want to solve this problem with that kind of language? You just have to look throughout history, like if I sort of a David Attenborough-style sociologist, I would look at human history and see all the civil wars and the wars and the uprisings. Look at the way, for instance, you look at African countries where the Brits just arbitrarily drew borders around various different tribes and kingdoms and went, you're a country now, and how much there's internecine and tribal warfare in those countries and instability to this day. And you'd think to yourself, humans, yeah, they're a tribal species. You can't put them all in one pen and expect them not to fight. They're more like marauding troops of bonobo monkeys. They're going to fight for their territory and be very suspicious of one another. And what we found in politics are people who think we're all one human race, kumbaya, and guess what? We're not. And now they're reaping the sort of demon harvest from all of that.
Yeah.
From this...
I quite like my simian status, I have to say.
Your simian status.
On that basis. But yes, you're absolutely right. And you know, the idea that there are no cultural differentials doesn't mean one group's better than another. Just different. You know, if people come from.
But I think you are allowed to think that your own culture is better than an imported one.
It's a bit like religion, isn't it? You're meant to think your religion is better than all the others. It'd be a bit dark
because
if
it's
you
your
thought there was a better
culture,
one.
and that is what humans want to protect. They want to protect their own tribe. That's what I'm saying. It's biologically programmed into us. And so when I walk up and down the streets of London and I don't even hear the English language ever, and I don't see anybody that I believe was born and brought up here, it makes me feel like this country, the capital city that I should be proud of, that I've called home for over 10 years, has been stolen off me.
And the minute you say that, of course, Keir Starmer, Yvette Cooper, Angela Rayner, the left-wing meerkats pop their heads up.
You can't say that.
You can't say
it's
that,
all culturally enriching.
You might as well be the EDL if you're going to say that kind of stuff.
Terrorist. Oh, of course, yeah, actually, according to the Prevent programme, that makes me a terrorist, doesn't it?
It would do, yeah, if your kid said that at school.